Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. My name is Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher at irishbreakdown.com. Going to be joined shortly by Vince Dodaro. He had something came up that he has to be at right now, but he will join us shortly. In today's podcast, we're going to dive into the offensive line. But first, we're going to talk a little bit of recruiting. There's been some news breaking here recently about we've talked a lot about Notre Dame's big three at running back, right? There's been three prospects on the board this entire time that we kind of looked at as the big three. It is Dallin Hayden, Nicholas Singleton, and Gavin Sawchuk. That big three is now down to a big one. Dallin Hayden picked Ohio State today, no surprise. Gavin Sawchuk picked Oklahoma today, which might surprise some. But if you paid attention to the show yesterday, and if you read my article about the offensive dream class today, I think you're going to kind of read between the lines. I think this is going to go well for Notre Dame, and that's about all I can say about that. So I don't think there is a scenario in which Gavin Sawchuk would have picked Oklahoma without at least visiting Notre Dame first, unless there was a reason why. And we'll just have to kind of let it play out here over the next week or so, and we'll get the answer to that. So that's what's going on with recruiting. I did an article today. It's at irishbreakdown.com. You can check it out. Basically, I looked at what is the dream class for Notre Dame right now. What is the class that Notre Dame needs to put together that's going to say, hey, look, this is the kind of gap closing class that they need to sign. And it wasn't so much from a recruiting ranking standpoint, but more about how to build the roster the right way. And so it's not just, okay, sign the three highest ranked wide receivers or whatever the case may be. It's more about how do you build the right kind of depth chart. And so we talked about that on the offensive line, talked about the receivers, and of course we talked about the running back. So that's going to be it for recruiting for this part of it. We will certainly answer some questions. I see that there's already some questions in there about recruiting. We'll get into those when we get done with the offensive line show. So right now, let's talk a little bit about the Notre Dame offensive line situation. When you look at the Notre Dame offensive line, to me, this is the biggest question mark on offense by far. I don't even think it's a discussion. I think when you look at it and you say, hey, there's talent returning, but there's a lot of question marks. And I mean, we don't even know who's going to start yet. We don't know who's going to play where. Where's Jarrett Patterson going to play? Where's Josh Lugg going to play? You know, is Caden Madden bumping out one of the guards? Is he bumping out Zeke Correll? There's been a lot of information about this kind of going back and forth. So, honestly, I'm getting conflicting information myself. I mean, Brian Kelly says what he says about Jarrett Patterson being a center, being most comfortable at center. Then you read the comments that I had in my story on yesterday about Carson Hinsman, where Carson Hinsman said that Notre Dame told him that, you know, you're our center of the future after Jarrett Patterson. Well, that would lead me to believe that Notre Dame has kind of made the decision to move Jarrett Patterson back to center, which would bump Zeke Correll out of the starting lineup. Well, then I did some more digging after that and kind of reached out to a source who reached out to somebody that would know. And he said that as of when the players left the end of the school year before they went back for this June, that the plan was for Jarrett Patterson to be at guard and Zeke Correll to be at center. And then, of course, you'd have Lugg and Blake Fisher at tackle. So, to me, I don't know if this is Brian Kelly playing mind games with us. I don't know if it's Brian Kelly playing mind games with Florida State, and he just doesn't want them to know, or if it's Brian Kelly playing mind games with his players. It could be any of those things. Hopefully, it's not the third one. If he's doing it for the first two, I don't care. He can mess with us all he wants. I mean, he doesn't know us an explanation on who he's going to start. If he's doing it to mess up Florida State, I can live with that too. I just hope that it's not what you can't have. My biggest concern at the end of the day is that they're going to continue to just move people around throughout the fall. All that experimenting needed to be done when you got out of the spring. If they don't think Zeke Correll can start, I mean, I would probably disagree with that. I mean, I don't think Caden Madden's the kind of player that should automatically bump Zeke Correll out of the lineup. That kind of concerns me a little bit, you know. That would mean that the entire class of 2019 that was so highly ranked, which was the first recruiting class that everybody says Jeff Quinn did such a great job on, none of them are going to start by their junior years. That's problematic to me. So hopefully that's not the case. Because what that would then mean is that Rocco Spindler is going to be at that other guard spot battling with, Andrew Kristofic, potentially Zeke Correll, although I don't see how you can move him if he's also a center for you. So it's going to be, it's just, I mean, I had hoped that we would have some sort of answers by the time we got out of spring ball about who was going to play where. And right now it seems like the only answer we have is Blake Fisher's playing left tackle. I mean, that seems like that's the only true answer that we have.
But I feel I feel like the answers get moved. It seems like we have new answers every week.
It's not even that; it's new questions.
Yeah, okay.
It's like they almost invent new questions, and it's just one of those things where it's kind of like, you have to figure it out. You need to use all 20 some of those practices to figure out who your starting lineup is going to be. You can't be moving Jarrett Patterson guard to center, center to guard, whatever the case may be. You can't be moving Josh Lugg around halfway through fall camp. You need to figure out who's going to play where, and then let guys battle for those jobs.
Correct.
Here's the guards. Let them battle. So if it's a deal where you're going to put Jarrett Patterson back to center, fine, and move Zeke Correll out to guard, and give him a chance to battle with Kane Madden, or let Andrew Kristofic battle with Kane Madden, and then let Zeke Correll battle with Rocco, or vice versa, and Quinn Carroll. But it's just the fact that we're still sitting here June 22nd, and there's a lot of uncertainty. With who's going to play where. I just got to hope for the sake of Notre Dame that this is just Brian Kelly playing mind games. That's all that I hope it is. And because if it's a situation where they're moving Jarrett Patterson back to center, it tells me that they're just inserting Kane Madden into the starting lineup and just rolling with it. And that's problematic for me.
Well, it's a huge problem. And that's one of the things that you and I were worried about when this announcement was made, that he was just going to be automatically inserted. End of discussion. Don't have to earn it or whatever. And that's the problem, that I have no problem with them bringing him in. I have no problem with them bringing him in.
It's the same thing with Ben Skoranek last year.
Right. I have no problem. Well, with the way it turned out, I
had no problem with them bringing in Ben Skoranek. I had a problem with it, just inserting him into the starting lineup and saying, be something that you're not. And that's exactly what happened. They tried to turn Ben Skoranek into something that he wasn't, which was a kind of a go-to guy.
Right.
And he's not that. And he wasn't that. And if you look at his production and if you look at his production last year, a big chunk of his production came in like 2 games.
Yeah.
And so, that to me, that's the kind of thing that number one, it's practically speaking, it's going to put a guy in there that I don't know necessarily should be able to just lock that spot up right away. But then what kind of message does that send to the rest of your unit?
Exactly. And that's the issue. If my message, if I'm bringing in Kane Madden, okay, which again, I had no problem with them bringing him in. My message is, hey, look, we're bringing in another guy to battle. Go get it. This isn't promised to anybody. This is just another guy that we're bringing in to battle for the position, to make our group better. That's what you do. And that's clearly, from what we can tell, that's clearly not how that conversation went.
I still don't think we know that. I mean, again, this is all based off things that we're hearing from second and third sources. So I'm not ready to say that that's not how the conversation went. But I will say this: I have a hard time believing that he was going to turn down a guaranteed job at Florida State to come to Notre Dame and battle.
Sure.
I have a hard time believing that. And so, but we'll find out. We'll find out in the fall.
You're right.
And again, look, we're going to know by September 5th if Kane Madden's ready to play, because at this level, because if he's handling himself well during fall camp, then I'm not going to be worried about him.
And so be it.
Just because look who he's going to be going against. If he's battling against Kurt Heinisch and Jason Adamiola and Riley Mills and Myron Tungavaloa-Mosa and Howard Cross and Jacob Lacey and guys like that, if he's doing well there and he's thriving, and they'll be fine.
Yeah,
they'll be fine.
Let's go. Yep.
And hopefully that's the case, because they need him with all this stuff that they're doing. They need Kane Madden to be as good as the coaching staff hopes he can be.
Yeah, or that they think he is.
Yeah, and then if he is that good, he brings a toughness to the table. He brings some power to the table. He brings obviously a lot of experience to the table. He brings leadership to the table. So, I mean, there's a lot of positives. And then you put him in between, probably going to put him in between, I would imagine, Lugg and Patterson. So you're going to have a kind of a center to the right side of the line that's going to be very experienced and good run blockers. And then you're just going to have a lot of experience on the left side of the line, which still to me just blows my mind that that's the way to go. But
don't even understand that. But we'll get into that.
But we're gonna focus on the positives as well today too. But it's just, look, that's just one position that you don't want to have a lot of uncertainty. And you don't want to have a lot of moving parts. You look, it's fine to do that during the fall, but as we said in the fall, you need to get about or in the spring, you need to get about halfway through spring and figure out who's going to play where.
That didn't seem to happen.
It never happened, and it doesn't sound like it's happened yet. And that's problematic. So either one of two things is happening. Either there's too many guys that are just too good that you can't figure out who's going to start, which that doesn't seem to be the case based on what we saw in the spring and in the spring game. And the other one is we don't know who. We're not comfortable with anybody, because if they were like, oh man, Kristofic killed it and Zeke Correll did great and Quinn Carroll's ready to play and Tosh Baker did great, they wouldn't have gone after Kane Madden. They could say all they want about, we're just looking for competition and all that other kind of stuff. I mean, it just, to me, that stuff that's talking points. That's spin. Because if you were comfortable with the kids you had, you wouldn't have brought in a 6-year senior second-team All-American guy.
Well, and I have if you would have told me that Notre Dame would be bringing in grad transfers on the offensive line, I would have told you were crazy. Just based on the depth of talent that we believe is there, or that we believe has been there. I am surprised that that's the case, to be honest with you, but I guess that's where we are. And at least in the way that the coaching staff is looking at the offensive line. Right. I didn't think going in that would have been necessary. They seem to deem that it's necessary.
Right.
I'm just a little surprised by the whole thing. Again, I'm okay with them doing it if they think that they need it, but
I'm even okay doing it if Kane Madden's as good as they think he is.
For sure, because he makes the position group better.
Well, because
I'm not convinced.
What I mean is this, Vince, is if he's as good as they say, second team All-American caliber player,
right?
Even if you had confidence in those other players, I would understand bringing them in. So that's my point, is if they're right about Kane Madden, then I have zero criticisms about bringing him in, even if they're developing the younger players. Sure. Because he's a second-team All-American.
Right. Anytime you can bring in an All-American,
right?
You do it,
especially in a year. And again, this is the tough thing that the toughest position that Notre Dame is in, genuinely, in their defense. You are in a situation where I believe, because of, I think Ohio State's going to be down a little bit. I think Alabama's going to be down. Clemson's going to be down from what they were last year.
Sure.
They're not going to be like 8-4 teams, right?
Right.
But basically, the gap is narrowed partly because I think Notre Dame's going to be better in a lot of spots, but also partly because, as we said, I think last week, the gap can be narrowed one of two ways. One is Notre Dame just closes on them, or
the gap,
it's kind of this.
A little bit of both.
They fall back. Yeah. And I think that 2021 is a lot like 2017 was. If you look at 2017, it was a similar situation. Alabama won the title, but if you put that Alabama team up against the 18 team that lost the title game, that 18 team would have smacked them. I think the 19 team would have beat them, and I think the 20 team would have beat them by 3 touchdowns, that same Alabama team. Clemson was down, and Alabama won the title that year. To me, Clemson was down that year. That was the Kelly Bryant year. That was kind of the buffer, the bridge year between Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence.
Sure.
That was not a good Clemson offense. That was a Clemson team that lost to a 4-8 Syracuse team in the regular season.
Right.
Ohio State was a 2-loss team that year. They were down that season a little bit. I mean, that was the year that Iowa just destroyed.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Ohio State, and then they also got spanked by Oklahoma early in the season. I thought the best team in the country that year was Oklahoma. They just kind of got into a bad matchup against Georgia. That Georgia was kind of their kryptonite because Georgia had that great running game that could control the clock and all those kind of things. But that was a year where I felt like if Notre Dame could have kind of got their heads out of their what's in November against Miami and Stanford, I'd have taken that Notre Dame team in the playoffs. I'd have liked to see them match up against anybody.
Sure.
But it's a situation where other years it's like 2020, 2018. The best Notre Dame team would have had a hard time with that Clemson team.
Sure.
It could have been competitive, but that was going to be a tough deal. Just past year, 2020, the best Notre Dame team would have had a really tough time with this Alabama team because they were so good on offense.
They were, yeah.
And that's just kind of how it goes sometimes. You're just, I think in 2015, I think Alabama and Clemson were both better in 2015 than they were in 2016. Both of them. But they played each other. Bama won one year and Clemson won the next because they lost players. So, to me, I look at it and I say this is one of those years that could be there for the taking for Notre Dame.
Sure.
And so, yes, you want to develop your players for the future and even for this year. But if you got a chance to go nab an All-American caliber transfer in a year where you might that kind
Have a
of
shot,
difference
yeah.
could be the difference between you going 10-2 or 11-1 and making the playoff, and then making a run to the championship. So I get where they're coming from, and that's why I say at the end of the day, this is we could beat the Kane Madden horse to death. We're just gonna have to wait to see how fall camp goes and how the September 5th goes, because if they are right on him and he's as good as advertised, that is a huge pickup, because now you have 2 All-American caliber players on your offensive line. Him and they're both in the middle. And we've talked in recent years. You and I have talked, and Lou Samoji and I used to talk about this a lot, where back in the day you had to be good at tackle. I mean, you had to be good at tackle. But nowadays with the quick game, with the RPOs, you have to be just as good up the middle, because what defenses has done in this era of screen game, RPOs, and quick game is there's now trying to get more pressure up the middle. And in most football positions, guys are getting bigger. If you go back, watch a game from 20 years ago, the offensive linemen are way bigger than they used to be. But you're seeing a little bit of a trend in college football where interior defenders are actually getting smaller from what they were 10 years ago, because of what we talked about. Teams are trying to attack up the middle, which means you got to be better up the middle. The guards and centers are now making a lot more money in the NFL than they were 5-10 years ago because of this. So if Kane Madden's as good as advertised, then a lot of these questions that we're having are figured out. Now, I would still debate of, the Zeke Correll, Jarrett Patterson thing, but then you go back to, I'm trying to play devil's advocate for a second here, Vince.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, center's an important position. Yeah, we think Zeke's a good player, but we think Jarrett Patterson's the best center in the country. Do you really want to mess with that? So again, I can understand a lot of this, right? If we're being objective, we may have personal disagreements, because I like Zeke Correll, I like Andrew Kristofic. I wish they would have been developed better. But if we're looking at it saying what is the best lineup in 2021 of what we know, what's known, so not taking any chances on who develops the fall camp, but as what we know Jarrett Patterson's one of the best centers in the country, and Kane Madden was the second-team All-American. The best Josh Lugg has ever played at Notre Dame was at right tackle.
Right tackle,
and then obviously Blake Fisher's and stuff. So so there's some. If Kane's as good as advertised, and now you keep Jarrett at center, you're now solid at 4 positions, in my opinion. So that's the devil's advocate argument towards we started off with why we don't like these moves, but the devil's advocate argument, Vince, is, you have to be willing to say, you know what? Yeah, personally, I don't like the move, but I understand it. And if they are right, this is going to turn out to be something that really helps the offense take that next step, and it solidifies the offensive line. And now you say, now that's not going to be a problem anymore, or it could end up being a bigger problem because you did all this tinkering. So to me, it's going to go one of two ways. And I think at the end of the day, we can both agree that this is one of those situations where I pray to the football universe, which doesn't exist because my belief system, but I'm just having some fun here. I hope to goodness that they're right on this one. This is one of those ones I want to absolutely be wrong.
Absolutely. No,
and
me
I will
too.
be the first one that says, I didn't tell you so. You know what I mean? They're right, and I'm glad that they're right. This is, of all the things that I hope to be wrong about, and it's not much, this is one of those things. I hope I'm right. What I mean is I hope I'm right on Jack Cohn, right?
For sure. Yeah,
I hope I'm right on the receivers. I hope that I'm right on the D-line being as good as advertised, and that you and I are right on the corners are going to be better. This is one position that I'm not as excited about, the offensive line, and it's a pretty important one. This is the one I hope to be wrong about, because if it's not as good as it needs to be, then it hurts the quarterback, it hurts the running backs, it hurts the pass game, and it's going to end up being the thing that keeps Notre Dame from being a playoff team and a title contender. When if you look at their roster everywhere else, this is a team to me that can stack up with people.
Sure. Hey, we got a super chat, Brian. We got to get it in. Patrick, thanks, man.
That's
we really
big time,
appreciate
Patrick.
it.
Thank you.
That's awesome. He says, hey, coach, have you ever developed a relationship with a recruit that swayed your evaluation of them a little bit one way or the other? Not on purpose, obviously, but looking back on it now, love you guys.
Yes. Yeah, I'll admit that. When I first got into this business, you start to develop these relationships with these kids, and it's kind of like, okay, you start looking for the positives, right?
Sure,
it's
absolutely.
It's kind of like if you're dating a girl and you're kind of like, okay, well, what you start I kind of like her, and so you start kind of looking for the good things, right? And then maybe you don't focus on some of the other things, which is when that's where relationship. I should have probably seen that that red flag at the beginning of this relationship, But no, I mean that's true. Like I'll tell you, one of the best kids I've ever gotten to know in the recruiting process was Matt Hegarty. just an awesome kid, just a great kid. And I got to know him really well. And it was like my second year really covering the team. And I got to know him from just covering recruiting. I was dealing with recruiting at the time. And there were some things about his game that I look back now, I should have seen as an evaluator that this was going to be problematic as far as him being a tackler.
Sure.
And he wasn't super long. There was a couple of things where he was still a really good player that I think would have been much better. He was a pretty good player in college. I mean, he started for Notre Dame at times, and then he went to Oregon and started. He also had that major heart problem, which kind of he never, was quite the same guy, and he had some injuries. But and so that was one, and that kind of. After that first full year, 2010 and 2011, the second year, actually full year, and I got back into coaching after that. When I got back into doing this job, I kind of looked at my first stint of doing it and said, where are some areas that I wish I would have done a better job? Where did I miss? And one of those was that part of it. So at that point in time, I didn't work as hard to develop the relationships part. I tried to keep it, because I was still in coach mode. When you're a coach and you're recruiting a kid, you've got to develop a relationship with the kid. Yep. And I was still in coach mode. That's really what hurt me. I was still in coach mode. Then I had to kind of say, okay, I'm not a coach anymore. I'm a recruiting analyst, and that means I've got to maintain a level of, of just kind of not being there. So that's also why I don't really talk to recruits anymore. I'm trying to hire people to do that because to me, it's kind of like, you run the risk of, number one, you don't want to hurt the kid. I like the kid. He's a good kid. I know what he's going through, and maybe throw him a bone and put a positive evaluation out there. That's human nature. If you're not a horrible person, you're going to have that desire to do that unless you're just like an unfeeling human being.
Yeah.
And so, that's a danger. But then also the other part is you have to look at it and say, all right, I want to be able to be critical of this kid without jeopardizing, he's not going to talk to me anymore.
Right.
So, one thing that I tell people we've got one person who's already working Blake's Sofas, and then we got a couple other people that are going to be starting here soon, maybe 3 more people that are hopefully going to be starting in the next couple of weeks covering recruiting. And the one thing I say to them is, let me do the evaluations, right? If you want to talk about how you think the kid's a really good player, but don't be critical of a kid. That's not your job. That's my job.
Right.
Because you don't want the kid getting mad at you, and then you don't want to, I try to remove that temptation from them.
Sure.
That's my job. But I'm doing it where I'm not talking to this kid. I don't know that kid. I don't talk to any of these kids really anymore. So I can just be objective. And what's funny is there was a player recently whose dad I became really good friends with. Well, we first talked because I wrote a critical evaluation of his son. Mm-hmm. And so he calls me. He's like, hey, I just wanted to talk you through this. What are you seeing? And so, he wasn't like, why'd you write that about my kid? Right. It was more of like, hey, I want to talk to you and find out, what you saw. Because I had made a comment that I thought his son was a bit overrated, but then I followed it up with overrated from the fact that he was like a top 50 kid, and I viewed him as more of like a top 100 to 150 kid. So it wasn't like he
hairs a little bit. Yeah,
right. So, but it was one of those things where he understood that. He just wanted to know what my concern was.
Sure.
And then, of course, I said, these are the things I'm looking for as senior year. And then as a senior, that player went out and did those things, and I bumped him back up.
Sure.
But that was an interesting one where usually you think it'd be the other way around, where it's like you say a glowing thing about a kid and his dad's really excited and thanks you for it. And that's usually where it goes. But like the closest relationship I ever developed doing this was from someone who our first interaction was him asking me why I didn't think as high of his son as other people thought of his son. But what that does is that allows me to do this without his emotion.
Sure.
And even then it's still hard. Like, look, I don't like criticizing Ian Book. It's not something I take joy in because I see his dad around. I know his dad hates my guts. I know that he does. I mean, that's not a secret. But I understand why.
First I've heard of it, so I'm chuckling.
I understand why because I'm critical of his kid. I get that, and I don't take joy out of knowing that. But that's my job. I don't answer to Ian Book or to Brian Kelly or to a parent. I answer to the people watching the show. I answer to the people that pay money for our show. And that's what I'm saying. I'm going to give you my honest opinion. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But you always know you're getting my honest opinion.
Absolutely.
And it was harder to do that when you're developing relationships with people.
Yep.
And so, I mean, that's a great question, Patrick, because that is an issue. And that's one of the things that I said, you know what, when I'm doing my own thing, the first chance I have to get out of calling recruits I want to be out of it. And that was one of the things that I sort of was part of my negotiation going over to Blue and Gold Illustrated is I didn't want to be calling recruits. I want to do an analysis. I don't want to be calling a lot of recruits.
Right.
And so that last year, that was tough. And real quick, Jeff Nantkiss said, I'm in the ER with my wife, and she told me to sit down and watch you guys so I would stop bugging her. No better way to pass time. Hey, Jeff,
Wow.
I love that you're doing that, but I don't know what's going on, but we're definitely going to be praying for your wife and keep us posted on how she's doing and all that kind of stuff. So we'll definitely have you in our prayers. But yeah, but back, Patrick, that was a great question, man. That was a really, really good question.
Yeah,
and it's something I'm okay being honest about too. Like
it's tough to compartmentalize that kind of thing because I haven't had the opportunity to call a bunch of recruits, but I've known a few here and there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's difficult to put it in a box, okay, I can evaluate this kid, but then I can also root for him,
right?
To be successful,
right?
Even though I have evaluated what he is and who he is and things of that. It's really
it was harder doing it this way than it was as a coach. Because as a coach, you get to the connection with these kids. Here's an example. One of my groomsmen at my wedding was a former player of mine. Now, he was a senior, and I was in my second year coaching, so we were basically the same. I was like a year older than he was.
Pretty close to the same age, yeah, right.
But I benched him. He was a starting fullback coming into the year, and I had to make the decision to bench him because we just had better players.
Mm-hmm.
But I love the kid. We agreed with everything politically. We love we did a State of the Union party at his dorm, right?
That's hilarious.
Because we were both really big into politics at the time. And it was funny. That was around the time of going into a war with Iraq, and this is right after 9/11. And him and he had a debate on campus about the Iraq war with another girl on campus. And so I'm sitting there watching. It's me and because I enjoyed that stuff. And he was getting ready to come into the auditorium where he was going to be doing it. And like 5 or 6 of our football players came in with him, and they had like ties around there, just like dressed goofy. And they had a boombox, and they were playing "Bombs Over Baghdad" by Outkast. I lost it. But anyway, but it was tough to make that decision. But emotionally it was tough. But it wasn't a tough decision to make because I have a job to do.
Sure.
And that job is to win football games. And if I don't make the right decision, we don't win football games. Where if I'm off on a kid's ranking because I like them, it doesn't necessarily hurt me. It's I misevaluated the kid. Right. And so that's the reason why I say, you really have to be careful with those kind of things, that you're not allowing your personal feelings to people cloud your judgment. And and also is the other thing too, Patrick, is, do you hang on to a kid being, this kid should play at Notre Dame because of how you thought of him in high school? That's another thing that you have to be careful of. Like, so, hey, I loved this kid in high school as a player. He's not getting a shot. And I'm pounding the table saying these coaches are idiots because they're not playing this kid based off what? Based off what he was in high school. Well, that's not always the case. Kids aren't always what they were. You don't know if the kid's working hard. I mean, so you have to really make sure that when you're evaluating a kid in college, that you're evaluating it off what you've seen in college, right? And so those are tough things, and that's all part of the evaluation. And I think that's where this to take it back to the offensive line. So let's get back on track to the offensive line. That's the tough spot that we're in, where I'm trying to be more open-minded to the decisions being made.
You're doing a better job of that than I am.
It'd be easy for me to say Jeff Quinn's done a terrible job of developing players. And I do believe that to a degree based on the fact these guys haven't developed.
Sure.
But why do I think they haven't developed and he's doing a bad job? It's because of what I thought they were in high school.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be at least open-minded enough to say maybe he is doing the job, but so-and-so kid hasn't put on the weight that they'd hoped, or so-and-so kid hasn't made the strength strides that we had hoped, or so-and-so kid is just for whatever reason isn't developing despite the best efforts of Jeff Quinn. We have to be open-minded enough to that until we see the product in the fall. If the product in the fall is not good, then we can look back and say, he did a bad job putting this together.
Yeah.
But we have to at least be willing to give the staff the benefit of the doubt to a degree. So we state our frustrations, we state what we think should happen, but I think it'd be unfair and honestly biased if we didn't at least say, okay, but I understand why they would make this decision. Even though I don't agree with it, I understand it. And if they're right, here's the ramifications of it. If I'm right, because look, you and I have been saying for months what it's going to look like if we're right, and that's problematic. But what if Tommy Rees and Jeff Quinn are right? What if Brian Kelly's right?
Right.
Well, then what's it going to look like? What it's going to look like is a very experienced veteran right side of the line that allows you the power to run the football. That's going to be important. Now you have to figure out your inexperienced left side.
Right.
And so, but again, I'm not as concerned about the left tackle simply because of just how good Blake Fisher looked. And that's an example. Like, if Blake Fisher was the same guy I thought he was in high school, I'd be a lot more concerned about where they were, but just because any true freshman. But Blake Fisher has been, I ranked him as the number one offensive recruit in the class. Actually, I think the number one overall recruit in the class. And he's still better than I thought he was going to be.
Right.
I mean, that doesn't happen often. So again, Vince, you just have to be able to, we have to be willing to say, maybe we're the ones who have a clouded judgment. You know what I mean? And that's why, so like what a lot of people don't know is with the Ian Book thing. When I first started being critical of Ian Book, one thing that I did that I don't tell a lot of people this is there's people that I know in the coaching business, people I know in the evaluating business and things like that I respect. And there aren't many that I will turn to and ask their opinion. But I said, hey, man, did you watch the game this weekend? Yeah, I did. What'd you think of Ian's performance? No, I thought he was terrible. What'd you think? Hey, what'd you think of how Ian Book played? And then, okay, give me feedback. And then usually they were on the same page with me. If they weren't, I'd go back and look at it again and say, okay, am I being too critical here? Am I being too tough here? Normally I still felt convicted because, that's just, I don't come to these opinions just I see okay, he stunk. So you need to be able to do that. And that's what I'm trying to do with this offensive line is I'm trying to be open-minded to if they are correct and Kane Madden is good, that's a good thing for Notre Dame. Absolutely. We need to be open to that. If they then decide to keep Jarrett Patterson at center, I can agree or disagree with it, but we at least need to be able to express why they would do that and the positive because you've been in coaching, Vince. Sometimes it's like you're in a meeting and there's 4 coaches and you guys all disagree on something. You as the offensive coordinator, head coach, at the end of the day have to make the decision. Yep. We're going to go with this. And we all got to hope that this is the right way to go. Yep. Right? Absolutely. But it doesn't mean that everybody agreed with it. That never happens. I mean, that rarely happens in football. Where everyone's, what do you think? And I'll say this, if I'm in a meeting and I make a suggestion and all 9 people say that's a great suggestion, I'm like, some of y'all are lying. Because I know that's not the you know what I mean? Like, I think it was a great idea, but I know it wasn't that great of an idea. Like, talk, right? Come to me. Be honest, and you need that in the coaching staff. That's the best part of a coaching staff is that it's the guys that are going to give you their honest opinion. You may not want to hear it all the time. You need that. But you need that. And that's how I build my coaching staffs. You need guys. Look, I tell them all the time, like, I want your opinion. I'm going to take your opinion. If it's better than, if we decide it's better than what I thought, then we're going with it. And, if I have to make the final decision because I'm the head coach, so be it. But I want everybody's opinion. And, a lot of time, the key here is to surround yourself with guys that are smarter than you. But you also have to be open-minded enough to say, I may be wrong on this. And that's what I'm trying to do more of on this channel is, look, I'm always going to give you my opinion. Always. And there's going to be people that don't like it. And we probably already earned a couple downvotes. I don't care. But at the same time, what I am also trying to do is be more willing to discuss, but what if I'm wrong? Yeah. What does that look like? Sure. So let's get back to the offensive line. And so we've talked about Kane Madden a lot. That's not a big issue. Yep. But I think the Kane Madden decision, I think all but solidified the fact that Josh Lugg will stay at right tackle. I agree. I'm okay with. Yep. I've always felt Josh Lugg was better suited on the inside, but he looked better in 2019 in actual game time play. Right. Yeah. Now, part of it is he was battling with some back issues last year, and that hurt him at guard too. But at the end of the day, he's a pretty decent. If Josh Lugg simply repeats what he did in the last 5 games of 2019, they're going to be solid at right tackle. Sure. They're not going to be as good as what they had with Robert Hainsey, but they're going to be solid, right? Now the question comes down to what about the other 2 spots? So you're set at center. If Jarrett Patterson's at center, you're set there. We both like Zeke Correll, but we also would admit Jarrett Patterson's their best center. But it's more about what's the best 5. So you've got one of the best centers in the country now at center. Okay. You've got a veteran, proven guy at right tackle. You've got a second-team All-American coming in at right guard. So let's just assume that he plays. Well, but he played like an All-American. I mean, like he was one of the best guys at that level. right?
Okay. Yes.
His
absolutely.
film was really good at that level.
Yes.
Like
Absolutely.
you watch his film, he dominates that level.
Correct.
Our issues are, how does that translate to playing at Notre Dame? It's not always the same. That's the issue. So we've never watched this film and say, this guy sucks. He's a really good Sun Belt player. He's a really good Conference USA player. He's a really good MAC player.
Right.
But how's that going to happen when he's playing against cats from the ACC every week and cats from the Pac-12 and the Big Ten and things like that? That's my concern.
Sure.
But if he is as good as they think,
then you got a great right guard.
Then you're set. Center to right tackle, Notre Dame is set. It is no longer a question mark, in my opinion, if they are right. Kane Madden is the key to this whole thing.
I agree.
If Kane Madden's as good as they think, then I think this line is going to end up being pretty good. If he's not, that's problematic. Because if he's locked in at right guard, let's just say he's the starter at right guard.
Yep.
Now what do you do at left guard? You've got Rocco, you've got Kristofic, you've got Quinn Carroll, and you've got potentially Zeke Correll now.
Yeah.
Well, that's a lot more talented bodies. You got to think whoever wins that job, or if there's, I would still say I'd love to see a rotation there. I would love to see that. You could also move Kane Madden to left guard and try to get a more veteran player by Blake Fisher, but I personally wouldn't do that because why mess with what you already know the kid can do?
He knows right guard. He's a second team All-American.
He's been playing right-handed for 3 years now.
Right,
like just leave him at right guard.
I agree with that.
But if they did choose to do it, then whatever. But that second guard spot to me is the question mark at this point in time.
Yep.
And how that battle shakes out to me, because an example is one position not living up to its ability can blow up the whole line. And a perfect example is 2016. If you go back and look at 2016 on just the offensive line, forget the rest of the team, just the offensive line, it was a pretty decent offensive line. It was a pretty good offensive line. Mike McGlinchey made a couple second-team, third-team All-American lists. Quentin Nelson made a couple second-team, third-team All-American lists during 2016. If you go watch Alex Bars that year, Alex Bars was pretty good that year. Sam Mustipher had a couple bad games, the Stanford game, the NC State game. But overall, I thought Sam played pretty good football. But the right guard was a train wreck. I mean, you had Colin McGovern was having such, let's just say he was having such tough mental problems, like just handling everything that was happening, that they had to have cues in the middle of the game where the linemen were doing things to calm him down. You can't have that. Then eventually he got replaced in the starting lineup. But that right guard just never got settled, and it hurt the line. Because teams could see the film like, okay, this is where we're going to attack. A gap, B gap to the right side of their line. Yeah, right. That's where we're going to attack. And it caused problems. So what you could be, if Blake Fisher's as good as advertised, Jarrett Patterson we know is as good as advertised. If Kane Madden is as good as advertised, if Josh Lugg keeps doing what he's been doing at tackle, and that left guard situation is a problem, the offensive line is going to struggle.
Sure.
It just is. So now you have potentially more bodies battling for that one open spot to where now you feel like, well, whoever wins that battle, I'm going to be more comfortable in maybe than I would have previously, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So again, but that all boils down to you better hope that right guard is as good as you think he is.
Well, and Notre Dame has had success with the rotation. I mean, we've talked about it a bunch of times. They won the best offensive line award in the Joe Moore Award with a rotation at right tackle. So, it can be done, and it can be done at a high level. And I get very nervous thinking about an all freshman left side of the line. I just do. And it's not, I'm not saying anything against their talent. I'm not, maybe they're ready for that. But
it's all about experience and communication. It has nothing to do with their talent.
And those two have never been on the same team before.
Those two guys start, Vince, they're the two biggest linemen Notre Dame has.
True.
I mean, they are. I mean, if Rocco's is the 315 that they listed him as in the spring, him and Blake are the two biggest the linemen they have. So it's not the physical talent, but
no, I'm not.
As we've said before,
it is. Yeah.
Offensive line is not just about physical ability. It's about communication. It's about technique. It's about being on the same page. It's about, like I said, it's a symphony. It's a ballet, however you want to do it, where if one person's off, the whole thing's going to look bad or sound bad.
Correct.
Offensive line's the same way. And that's the concern that we have.
That's absolutely
I'll say this about a rotation. I like the idea of a rotation, but it's got to be done the right way. Mm-hmm. You don't just do it just to do it. I think you have to have two guys that have earned it. And that's what happened in 2017. Sure. So I remember when I had heard that Robert Hainsey was going to play, I reached out to some sources to find out, is Kramer struggling? Is there an injury? And I was like, no, it's just Tommy had a great fall camp. Robert is just too good not to play.
Yeah.
And that's what it boiled down to. You've got to hope that it's that kind of thing where it's like, Rocco is going to, let's just say Zeke Correll starts at guard. Let's just say the thought process is we're going to move Zeke to guard
because he's still going to be our starting
guard.
Yeah.
But we want to take away the snapping part of it because he is undersized, right? We want to take that away from him so he can just focus on blocking.
That'd be interesting. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. I can dig that. He was a guard in high school. He's not a natural, he's not a lifelong center. Okay. So if you do that, now all of a sudden, Vince, we look at it and say, if that's the move, again, assuming Cade Madden's as good as advertised,
right?
You have a guy that has started at least 2 college football games at every position except one, left tackle, which happens to be where your most physically gifted player is playing, and Blake Fisher. So now all of a sudden, if you want to spin it that way, and it is spin, I'm making a counter argument. You know what I mean?
Making an argument for
but
all
if you spin it that way, and that's actually how it plays out. Now all of a sudden, I start feeling good about the line. Now, if Rocco's going to play, or Andrew Kristofic's going to play, or Quinn Carroll's going to play, it's because, Zeke's our starter, but man, I can't justify looking over and not having Rocco Spindler, at least in the game. So maybe it's not in every other series like it was in 2017. Maybe it's in every third. So there's all types of different ways to look at it, Vince. Sure. But again, the fact that we have so many unknowns and so many questions and so many what ifs is ultimately, to be honest, is what makes me a little nervous about this position group.
I agree.
Really does.
And there's only so much trial and error you can get done in fall camp. Because what do you got? 25 practices or so?
Right. About 25. And now there's limitations on only so many of them are going to be in full pads and all that
exactly.
kind of stuff.
And so, you're really, the quote unquote experimental time is really only the first week.
Right.
Maybe 2.
And even then, it can't even be experimental. You have to go into fall camp saying, this is what we think it's going to be. Now, we're going to not be so stubborn to just stick with that for 25 practices if it's not working out.
Right.
But this is our plan.
Right.
This is what we hope to happen.
Because that's what spring is for.
Right.
Spring is for experimentation.
And especially now at summer practices, you can see if, hey, is Rocco building on this? Is Tosh Baker having some of the strength growths that you need him to have? Is Kane, look, you can learn a lot about how Kane Madden moves his feet right now in the summer workouts.
Absolutely.
Because if Matt Bayless is going back like, hey, this kid has the slowest feet we have, then my concerns may have, or you may say, hey, look, this kid's, hey, coach, I watched the film. I was worried about this kid's foot quickness, but we're watching him in drills. We like it. Then it goes back to the thing that you and I talked about at the very beginning when the Kane Madden thing came along was there's a possibility, and again, we don't know this, that maybe he played heavy-footed because he was taught to play heavy-footed.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure.
So there's always that. But the point is, Jeff Quinn's not going to show up on the first day of fall camp and be like, okay, now it's time to find out if this kid has the feet. They're going to have all summer to figure that out. Matt Bayless is going to be the one directing that, and then they're going to see that kind of stuff. So they're going to know if okay, this is an issue. So how do we protect that?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you can learn in shorts and t-shirts, and a lineman's feet. A lineman's feet is one of them. So like when you go watch a lineman, at a camp or whatever, when they're not in pads, you can see how good their footwork is.
Right.
Now, it's hard to see punch and it's hard to see, some strength and some things like that, but you can see feet.
It's hard to see football strength, but obviously, you can see bench and squat. But football strength you really can't see.
I'm talking football strength. Yeah, absolutely. But you can see feet. You can see how well guys move, and that's going to be important. And like you said, Matt Bayless will be able to see that, and Matt Bayless's staff will be able to see that. They've seen enough linemen. They've seen enough guys doing what they need to do during agility drills and those different kinds of workouts that they're going to know really, really quick what this kid can do with his feet. There's no question about that. I agree with that completely. Completely. As much as I don't like shorts and t-shirt stuff and make people making evaluations about that,
you should be making evaluations off those type of things. To your point, not like, hey, this kid's the number 1 ranked guard in the country based on what he did at a camp without pads where they got like 5 reps each. Right?
Exactly. Yes.
But as far as building a football team, so same thing with DBs. Hey, you know what? So-and-so really struggles flipping his hips in these drills because you're doing football. If you watch Notre Dame and I saw a video from Ohio State the other day. The best strength conditioning football people are people that try to build drills that can evaluate, engage, and practice football skills.
No question.
And so that's the thing I look about is I say, okay, what kind of, that's what they do. And that's something that I think Matt Balis does a great job with. So there's things you're going to see about all positions.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, so-and-so's lower body strength is getting way better. How do you know? Well, not only is he doing in the weight room, but we're doing these drills where they're pushing things, and he struggled to push that thing at the beginning of summer, but now he's blowing that thing up, right?
Right.
So again, it's about that fun. When a young linebacker. Hey, last summer J.D. Bertrand really struggled to pop and lock that one man sled, but now man, he's popping and locking that sucker. Okay, that tells me his functional strength is getting better.
Exactly.
Now,
his football strength.
Right. Exactly. And so those are things you can look at. And so with the offensive line, we're going to see if Tosh Baker's getting some of that functional strength improvement. We're going to see if Kane Madden can move his feet. Those are all things that are going to be part of this evaluation process. But at the end of the day, when you get into August, they have to have a plan. Here's our plan.
Right.
And then here's our next in line plan.
Right.
If this guy goes down. So what is your plan if Josh Lugg goes down with a back injury again? Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to move Jared Patterson out there, put Zeke Corral back at center. Or we're just going to give Tosh Baker a start. Or we're going to give Michael Carmody a start, whatever. We're going to move Andrew Kristofic back out there. Whatever your plan is, you have to have your plan. What if Jared goes down again at center?
Absolutely.
Right? What's the dominoes that fall if Jared gets hurt again?
Correct.
What if Kane's not up to par? You can't just assume he's going to be legit, and then he struggles, and you're like, well, now what do we do? 20 practices in, we've got Florida State coming up in a week and a half, and we don't know what's going on at right guard. What is your plan?
Right.
And you have to have those contingencies already developed. Every good staff should do that, to where this is our plan, but we're not going to be scrambling if such and such happens.
Right.
And so those are the things that you have to look at and you have to prepare for. But you have to start camp thinking this is our plan and we think it's going to work, but then also be willing to adjust if it's not working out. But then also, how long does it take? Because, again, you have a new left tackle, a new left guard. You're going to have a new right guard. Now the new right guard hasn't taken any snaps with these guys before. So there's going to be different communication, different timing. So you've got to say, well, how long are we willing to kind of ride this out before we start getting a little bit like, okay, this
nervous
isn't working out.
Yeah, right.
That's the question.
Yes. And that worries me to a degree. I guess what worries me more about anything else, if we're talking about our concerns going into the fall, is that the experimentation period is going to take too long, and they're not going to nail down what they want to be and where they want guys to be until the last minute. I'm not saying like the day before the game. I'm saying once you get into game prep, we're in game prep.
Your last 2 weeks is usually game prep. You have to have it figured out by then.
That's what I'm saying. I don't want the first day of game prep to be the first day that those guys are all together. Right. You know what I mean? Like that's what worries me. That they're going to be kind of throwing guys in and moving guys around up until that point. So that's my concern.
We saw this in 2014, where they experimented into the beginning of the season. Because if you remember correctly, that year, the reason that happened is because they didn't have most of those guys in the spring. I think Nick Martin was out that spring. They were replacing Chris Watt and Zach Martin. But then Christian Lombard was hurt. Nick Martin was hurt. I think Matt Hegarty was hurt. There was 3 or 4 guys that were out in the spring. So the fall was your experimental time. And that offensive line ended up being pretty good by the end of the year. But it struggled beginning of the year. And it's because of that timing, that continuity.
Right.
That when you understood there was a reason why. You had a bunch of dudes that were out in the spring. You literally took 0 snaps together of what could potentially be your starting offensive line because most of those guys weren't even in practice. Whereas this year you just had one guy out, but now you have one guy out. And
piece. Don't get me wrong.
Right. And now you've got a new piece in Kane Madden.
Right.
There's just a lot more questions now. So they're going to have a plan, and they're going to have to really force the issue. Because here's the thing you have to do. After that first week, which is, your first 3 days, you're really not in full pads till day 5.
For a week. Yeah, a week.
And so you're in shorts and a T-shirt your first 2 days. That's just about conditioning, timing, just getting guys used to your routine of practice, things like that.
And it's skill guys on air, know. Yeah.
And you'll do some one-on-ones, but it's just it's not really that important.
Correct.
And then you get to day 3, you've got uppers. Now you start to get a little bit of bang. You're just now you're still working out let's get the first couple of days of hitting out of the way,
because that's an adjustment period, people. If you've never played football before, those first couple of days of just thudding into another human, You got to get used to it. You got
no
to
matter
get your
how
body
much you've
used to
played
it.
football,
Exactly.
right? I mean, it's just getting back into that groove.
Correct.
Where you've been
Correct.
pulling up. Because here's the thing, you've been pulling up for months, right? When you're in 7-on-7s, you're pursuing the ball, but you got to pull up.
And you got to pull. Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah,
But now all of a sudden, like, okay, shoulder pads are on, run through them. And
Right.
you know, I mean, that's something that takes a little bit of time and work. And you also don't want to do too much because then you can overdo them, guys get hurt, etc.
Fine line.
But anyway, once you get past day 5, that's when you start saying, okay, now we're really evaluating. Now we're really seeing how they do.
Sure.
Because you've gotten through your period of shorts and then uppers and then full pads, and you've got through at least a couple full padded practices, and you're saying, okay, are we just kind of struggling?
Yeah.
All right. Well, okay, how much longer do we want to ride this thing before we tinker with it? Okay, let's give it a week.
Right.
Okay, cool. But that's where you have to constantly be evaluating it constantly.
Right.
And you don't just kind of, okay, let's go for 3 weeks and then we'll sit down and evaluate it. I mean, you're talking about it constantly.
Yep.
But you have to also be patient enough where you give yourself, okay, we're not going to rush into any decisions barring a guy just being awful for 10 practices, right? We're going to go with this group for 10 practices, or we have two or three guys competing in a couple spots, and so we're going to work each guy in. But whatever your deal is, you need to give it at least 10 practices, in my opinion.
I agree.
Whether it's 7 guys for 5 spots or 8 guys for 5 spots, or if you have your 5 and then there's your 2s, there's all types of different ways to do it. But whatever the plan is, they got to give it at least 10 days. But after that, you need to feel like, okay, we're trending in the right direction. We're not there yet because nobody's ready to play a game in 10 days.
Right.
I've said this. This is the emotional roller coaster of every football coach in the country.
Yeah.
The summer, man, we're feeling good. The kids are in the best shape of their lives. We're ready to go. If you're not feeling good about your team the first day of fall camp, you're going to suck, or you're just a negative person. But like every football, I feel really good about where this team is right now. By the middle of fall camp, you're like, we're the worst team in the country. We're going to lose every game. Every team in the country feels that way. And then by the time you get to the end of fall camp, you start feeling like, okay, I think we have a shot. But then you still don't really know because you haven't had a scrimmage and you haven't played anybody and things like that. So
I can't even imagine going 26, 25 practices without hitting another team, without competing against another. Because in high school,
you get scrimmages.
You get 1 week. You get 1 week before you're actually hitting somebody else. And then after the second week, you have a game.
I wish they did have scrimmages in football. I would love to see that. Like Notre Dame and Purdue, why can't they scrimmage? Like, just do 7-on-7? Because it's like what I mean by scrimmage is not like a full scrimmage, like preseason NFL football. I mean like what the NFL teams do.
Right.
You practice together. A team that you don't play.
Yep.
So like Notre Dame couldn't do it with Purdue this year, but they do with IU or Northwestern. You're doing drills together. You're doing 7-on-7s against each other. You're doing 1-on-1s against each other. Just things like that. And then you maybe do some team periods. It's not even a scrimmage. It's just a couple days of practicing against each other.
We call it 11-on-11.
I'd love that.
It's great.
I'd love that.
You don't even need lowers on. You can just do uppers, and you can do your thud tempo 11-on-11. It's just you're hitting somebody else. If you're the offense, you're playing against a defense that isn't yours. It's very beneficial. I am actually surprised that colleges don't do that.
Well, it's not allowed.
Well, I know that. I'm just saying I'm surprised that it's not allowed because I feel like that would be something that would be very beneficial.
See, your problem with this whole theory, Vince, is you're assuming the NCAA isn't filled with a bunch of morons.
Okay, fair enough.
That's your faulty assumption.
You're right.
But anyway, back to the topic of conversation. So, to me, I think the freshmen are going to be a big part of this, Vince. I mean, they just are. And part of it's out of necessity. Part of it's because they're just too good not to play, especially Blake Fisher. And so that's going to be a big thing too. Is that's the position you're going to have the most patience with early on is the freshman,
which is why I don't want it to be the entire left side of the line.
Yeah,
but
if you're going to do it, you need to do it day one.
Absolutely,
that's the thing I'd say is
all 25 practices,
every single rep. If you think Rocco Spindler's your guy, then you start him there.
Yes,
in the first day. Yep. And then you make someone else beat him out.
And you got to have kind of a long leash too, because he's going to make mistakes.
The only way you don't start him is if somebody else is just. I mean, if Andrew Kristofic or Zeke Correll just come out there and they're just balling. I mean, they're just wow. Then you say, okay, you know what? We're going to start so and so, and we're going to go to. That's how the rotation starts.
Sure.
The other part of it is, do you want to do that? And then maybe you hurt his confidence because then he's not the guy anymore. So, I mean, I get that. But the point is, whether it's as part of a rotation right away or he's just the guy, you need to give Blake Fisher and Rocco Spindler, if there's any chance that they're going to be the left side of your line, any chance at all, they need as many reps as possible doing that. And that's just a fact.
Yep.
And so that's the other part of this whole, them playing together thing, and not playing the mind games if that's what's going on, or so you got to solidify some things. Those kids, especially, Vince, to your point, are going to need more work than anybody, just from a timing and a communication and a technique standpoint.
Correct. Yep.
Rocco Spindler got a ton of reps in the fall. You know how many reps he got with Jarrett Patterson as the center? 0. Right. And so that's the thing, is like, okay, you're going to need to figure this out real quick. What can he do? What can he not do? And see what he does. And like you said, you need to give him a little bit of a longer leash, unless somebody's just flat out outplaying him.
Right.
You don't put him on the second team because he's making mistakes in the first 10 days of practice.
Correct.
You only put him on the second team, or you rotate him if he's not. I mean, he's doing okay. He's doing freshman stuff, but man, Andrew Kristofic's just having a great fall
killing
camp.
it. Yeah, absolutely.
Zeke Curl's having a great fall camp. Quinn Carroll's having a great fall camp. Something like that. Then you say, okay, look, because then Rocco's going to see that.
Right.
Like, if you put a guy on the second team because he just went out there for 10 days and just struggled, you're going to hurt his confidence. If he's like, he's going to see that Andrew Kristofic's blowing people up. He's going to watch the film. He's going to hear the coaches praising him, and he's going to understand.
Right.
That's the thing. But if it's just him struggling, but nobody else is seizing that spot, then leave him there. Dude, that's what you get paid 6 figures for.
Exactly.
Right? To every position coach. Don't tell
myself.
Well, the kid's not getting it done. Hey, that's your job. That's what you get paid for. Stop blaming the kids for why you're not developing them, right? Freaking coach them up.
Yep.
Especially the younger guys that are more talented. Give Xavier Watts a little bit more of a room to make a mistake as a sophomore. Right. Give Lorenzo Styles and Deion Colsey, it doesn't mean that you don't correct mistakes, but you don't, if they have a couple bad practices, you don't do with them with what you do with the seniors having some bad practices.
Right.
You put some foots on behinds at that point in time. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But at the same time, you also have to make sure that you're not just giving them so much of a leash that you come to the point where they're just not ready, and you haven't gotten any reps with what your lineup's going to look like. So it's not an easy thing. It really is tough, and that's the battles you always have in July and August. June and July as a coaching staff, and then heading into August of, okay, this is what we're going to give a shot. But look, I guarantee every single team in the country, with the exception of teams returning like 20 starters, there's always this happens the first couple weeks of camp. You think this is how it's going to go, but somebody didn't step up as good, or somebody regressed. Somebody else had a great offseason and they're better than you think. Like right now, we're not talking about Tosh Baker, okay? Because we saw Tosh in the spring. I think Tosh has all the talent in the world. I think he's got 5-star upside. We've talked about this, but his high school film is his high school film.
Right.
What we saw in the spring was a kid that still functionally doesn't have necessarily the strength that you need. He was a little bit too top heavy from adding all the weight, because he had to add weight. He needs to reshape that a little bit.
Sure.
And he really struggled with the good edge rushers. Okay, so right now, based on what we saw, Tosh isn't a guy that I think is ready to really push right now. However, Tosh is also a young kid that's at that age where, you see it all the time, Vince, in college. And I don't know, I don't know what it's like in high school, but in college, you see those kids from year 1 and 2, or a kid from year 2 to 3, that from the spring to the fall just becomes a different player.
Sure.
Happens every year.
Sure.
And so there's some of that too. So could that be a lineman? Could it be Tosh Baker? Because again, 5-star upside for sure. I have no doubt about that. It's just, as we expected, coming out of high school, as a 265-pound kid, he's going to need time.
Right.
And so I didn't expect Tosh to be pushing for as a redshirt freshman. But if he has that big offseason, and all of a sudden, okay, you know who our 5th best lineman is? It's Tosh Baker. So what do? Right? Okay, well, you're going to move Lug to guard. You're going to move Fisher to guard. I mean, so those are the things you always have to be prepared for too. What if Andrew Kristofic just takes off? Right? What if Quinn Carroll, he's now a little bit 4 more months further away, removed from his major knee surgery. Maybe he's that guy. So those are the things you have to be prepared for too, Vince. And those are the things you, as a coach, that's when you start getting excited.
Oh, absolutely.
When you have to make changes because you're forced to. Look, Rocco's having a good fall camp, and Andrew and so, but man, such and such is just balling right now.
Right.
That's when you get excited because that's when you know your team is pretty good. Like, hey, we weren't going to play Deion Colsey at receiver, but the dude just makes plays every single time he's on the field.
Yeah.
We had to play him.
Right.
Those kind of things. Or, hey, look, we had every intention of Jack Cohn being the starting quarterback, but Drew Pine or Tyler Buckner just outplayed him. All those things. You love those things. Those are what you don't want to be is, why are you starting Rocco? Well, he was the best of the guys there. You know what I mean? Like, you want to be starting Rocco because, like, man, this kid's going to – hey, look, this is what Brian Kelly used to say. Look, y'all, Blake's going to make mistakes against Florida State. Rocco's going to make mistakes against Florida State. But we're starting him because they're clearly two of our 5 best, and we're in it for the long game. We feel we can still win with them now, making those mistakes, but we feel like when these kids have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 games under their belt, we're going to be really good. And that's why you do those things. And that's part of the decision-making process too, is you may say, you know what? Technically right now, Rocco's not one of our best 5 because he's great. He's not grading out as one of our best 5.
Yeah.
He's one of your 5 most talented, but he's not grading out because he's still making a few too many mistakes. You have to make the decision as a coach of, am I okay living with that in September, knowing what he's going to be in November? Or do I think it's the mistakes are such that it's going to cost us games?
Sure.
Because then you can't necessarily live with that in September. But if you think it's to the point where maybe it won't cost us games, it may cost us a 2nd and 2 or a 3rd and 1, but it's not going to cost us the games because we're still way better in Florida State. We're still way better in Toledo. We're still way better than Purdue. We isn't looking at it from the coaching staff standpoint. Right. They say, we can live with that for the first month because we can still beat these teams with him making a few extra mistakes. Because we know when we get to October, November, and it's USC and it's North Carolina and it's Stanford and you get in the postseason and it's the playoff, we're going to need the 6'4", 315-pound monster freshman to have 12 games under his belt or 8 games under his belt or whatever the case may be. And so those are some of the tough decisions that Notre Dame's going to have to make too. Is do you just go with your most veteran, experienced guys that make the fewest mistakes, or are you willing to live with some mistakes? In 2020, I'm not living with mistakes. Right. There's a bunch of starters. I mean, if you're not getting the job done, I'm gonna play somebody else because you're a 3rd-year starter. You shouldn't be making these mistakes. But when it's a freshman, you're gonna have to live with some stuff early on because by the time you get to the end of the year, it's gonna be fun. Absolutely. And it's that way at offensive line. It's that way at receiver. It's that way at running back. I mean, it's that way in the secondary. If Cam Hart gets smoked a couple times in the first week of fall camp, you're not overreacting to that. Kind of expect it a little bit. Sure. And honestly, if Cam Hart's is dominating people, you might actually start getting a little nervous about your receiving core.
Receivers. Yes, exactly. Yes.
But so you have to live with some of that. Whereas if Drew White's making a bunch of mistakes, it's like you're a 5th-year senior.
It's like, dude, no.
Get off. Bo, get in there.
Yeah, it's time to see somebody else.
And so that's where you're at. That's where you're at.
That comes down to coaching, and that comes down to experience and all of those different things. I think going into the fall, offensive line has got to be, for me, the biggest question mark that we have to look at for the Notre Dame team. From a coaching standpoint, from a player personnel standpoint, from just all of it, right? There's so many question marks with the offensive line. And I'm not talking question marks like you said, like, oh, I wonder how good Cam Hart can be. I wonder who's going to be lining up at linebacker. Like, those are like, okay, these are exciting questions, right? The offensive line is like, oh, my God, I wonder who they're going to line up at offensive line. You know what I mean? And it's not because there's not talent there. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying I'm just curious as to what the decisions are going to be with this group.
And we're also at the end of and we'll kind of wrap it up with this before we dive into questions. I think the big thing for me, Vince, is we talk about questions. We've kind of finished these things off with questions. To me, the one question is obvious: who's going to play where and all that kind of stuff. Do the young guys make jumps? That's another question. Are we going to see the young guys make jumps going into? They got very valuable experience in the spring. What kind of jumps are they going to make in the fall? At the end of the day, the biggest question that we're going to get answered this season is how good of a coach is Jeff Quinn really?
God, you took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly what I say the same thing.
Here's the deal. I mean, here's the facts. Brian Kelly has admitted, remember, I think it was like last year, he admitted that the line didn't play up to snuff in 2019. He admitted it. He can't go back and change it now. He admitted it. And it's true. Yeah. The line in 2018 was okay. It was good enough. Line in 2019 was disappointing when you consider how many starters were coming back. And they did well down the stretch, but they also were playing against really bad teams down the stretch. And even then, they still weren't great. 2020, the line was great. Okay, so was it because Jeff Quinn found his groove as a coach? Was it because you had the Harry Hiestand influence with Chris Watt and some other ways that there was a Harry Hiestand influence
which
this year?
We've talked about.
Right. Some of it we haven't talked about. We won't talk about, but there was a lot bigger influence there than a lot of people realize. But then the other part of the Harry Hiestand influence was you had a line where 4 of the guys that were on your starting lineup were guys that were recruited and coached by Harry Hiestand first.
At some point, yes.
And so you look at it and say, okay, that's all gone now. You had 3-year starters across the board. Your only inexperienced guy relative was Jared Patterson,
who's a 2-year starter,
who's now a 2-year starter. He was only a 1 going into. Right. So he was going into year 2. Those other guys were going to at least year 3. Robert Hainsey was going into and Tommy Kramer were going into year 4,
right,
as starters.
True.
So you say, okay, it doesn't take the best line coach in the country to get that group. Thank you. To get that group ready to play, it takes just don't stink. Right.
Right.
That's not a knock on Jeff Quinn because we've praised Jeff Quinn for the job he did last year.
Sure.
But it's a lot easier to coach.
For the Joe Moore Award most of the year.
100%. And the fundamentals got good. They played with more force. They weren't catching like we had seen. There's a lot of things you deserve credit for, especially from a pass blocking standpoint. But the other part of it is you have to look at it and say, but you had like 120 career starts coming into the season. That's the easy look. Any offensive line coach in the country would take that opportunity. That because that's what you want. It's kind of like you're not even necessarily coaching at that point in time. You're just making sure they don't slide. Just keep doing what you're doing.
Yep.
Now this is where coaches earn their money, right?
The reason
that I view, I think his name's Bill Bedenbaugh. I think it's the name of the O-line coach at Oklahoma. The reason I view him as right now the best line coach in the country is not because he's developed some great lines, but he's been able to do it in tough circumstances. And an example, if you look at the 2018 Oklahoma team, they lost 4 starting offensive linemen from that team going into 2019, and they lost Kyler Murray, the Heisman Trophy winner. Now, they had Jalen Hurts, but I think we would all agree that although Jalen Hurts is a good player, he ain't Kyler Murray.
Not Kyler Murray,
right? So they lost 4 starting offensive linemen, and all 4 of them were drafted in the 4th round or higher, which is better than what happened with Notre Dame this year, where they had 3 guys drafted that high. Tommy Kramer went undrafted. Now, part of that was injuries, and then they went out that next year, and their rushing total dropped from 247 to 240. The yards per average attempt dropped, but it was still like almost like 6. They still averaged over 42 points a game. And so the offensive line still played well. Was it as good as it was in 2018? No. Was it still a top 10 unit? Absolutely. We've seen that at Alabama, where Alabama's had to completely overhaul their offensive line. They weren't as good that next year. They weren't a top 3 unit, but they were still a top 10 unit. No one's thinking that Alabama's taken a huge step back because they lost a first-round pick in Alex Leatherwood. They lost a 2nd-round pick in Landon Dickerson, who probably would have been a first-round pick. He was a 2nd-round pick despite blowing his knee out in the SEC championship game.
So he still can't walk. And
then you lost Deontay Brown. So you lost 3 starters. Is anybody thinking that Alabama's going to come out this year and struggle in the offensive line? No one's thinking that. So why are we thinking it's going to be the case in Notre Dame? Has Notre Dame not recruited well? I mean, look, you could say, well, Harry Hiestand didn't do a great job recruiting at the end because his last full class was not good. It wasn't. The 2018 class was subpar. Now, they got Jarrett Patterson after he left. I call that a wash because had Harry not left, they would have got the kid from Ohio State, Nicholas Pettit-Frere, who would be starting at right tackle or left tackle and be a dude for Notre Dame right now. I remember that kid, yeah. So he was going to go to Notre Dame if Harry Hiestand was still there. So, I mean, it's a wash. But overall, that was not a great – John Dirksen hasn't, Cole Mabry and, things like that, Luke Jones, those kind of guys. But you look at it and say, you can't say that because Jeff Quinn's now had 3 full recruiting classes coming in. You've got a transfer who's an All-American, right? There's no excuses to not have at least a good line this year. Now, I'm not expecting it to be a top 3 line. I'm not even necessarily expecting to be a top 5 line, to be honest with you. It just needs to be a top 10 unit. That's the key. And it needs to get better as the year progresses. Those are the 2 things. And if Coach Quinn can do that with this line, if he can get them to where they're a top 10 unit and they get better as the year goes on, then I'm going to look at that and what does that mean? Obviously, assignment correctness is going to be key. that they're not making the same mistakes in game 5 that they made in game 1, which was an issue in 2018 and 2019, where they had the same problems with twists week after week after week after week in 2018 and 2019. They're not playing with physicality. They're not coming off the ball. They're not blowing people up. Things that were problems in 18 and 19. And so those things, those things can't happen. There's no excuse for that. Now, if there's mistakes happening in the first 4 or 5 games, I'm not going to be banging them for that because I expect that. I think the only people they're going to criticize, say, oh, after 3 games, if you're saying Jeff Quinn is a terrible coach, blah, 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 then what you were doing is you were setting an unfair expectation in an attempt to ensure that you can be critical, right? Now, we will criticize the line if it doesn't play well early, but we shouldn't make sweeping conclusions about what Jeff Quinn is doing. And if I am doing that in September, I want you all to remind me, hey, coach, remember you said in the summer that we need to give it some time.
Sure.
As long as the mistakes are assignment or timing or things like that, if through the first 4 games of the year, they're back to catching, then we're going to have a problem.
Got to call them out. I mean, you have to, because that's coaching.
You don't need a 6 games of experience to come off the ball hard.
Correct. I don't care who you're playing.
Right?
It doesn't matter who you're playing. You could be playing a severely ineffective opponent, or you could be playing, the national championship.
Why you got to call out Florida State?
I didn't. That's not what I meant. I was actually thinking of like high school.
I'm sorry,
teams that
I was
play.
confused. You said ineffective football team. I just assumed you were talking about Florida State.
That's fair. That's fair.
My apologies.
But whether you're playing that team or whether you're playing in the national championship, coming off the ball has nothing to do with who you're playing against. Nothing. Right. So that's the point that you're making. It's right. That's a coached item. That's
a mentality thing.
Internal yes.
That's a mentality. Look, yes. You say this all the time. Hey, I don't care if you make a mistake. I'll coach that. But you better not make the mistake not going full speed.
Correct.
Because that's a whole different deal. Yep. And so, if they're playing hard and, hey, man, Rocco's just a little too aggressive at times. You got to, that's a good problem to have. If you're doing a lot of catching, then that's where I'm going to get concerned. So we're going to know pretty early if this line has the things where we can say, hey, you know what, let's give it some time because there's some things we like. There's some things we like.
I agree.
If we're criticizing him for players making mistakes and things like that and saying, hey, you can't coach, look at the mistakes they're making. That's being critical for just because you're just looking for a reason to be critical.
Right.
Because you didn't like that again, this is me. You didn't think he should have got hired in the first place, which I didn't. And so now every chance you get to bag on him, you're going to bag on him. That's all that is. Right. If it's just about, look, the timing's not there. They're not all on the same page and they're making too many mistakes. If that's my thing, Jeff Quinn stinks because of that, then that's just me looking for something to be critical of.
Sure.
If it's about they're not coming off the ball hard, they're not finishing, they're not playing physical, they're not pushing. That to me is okay. We're back to the pre-Chris Watt version of Jeff Quinn's line. Right. That's the issue. And I hope we don't see that. And honestly, that's not what I thought the issue was as much in the spring. We saw it a little bit in the spring game. And so I'm a little bit nervous about it, but it was kind of like one of the lines was that way. The other line wasn't that way. And so it's kind of like, all right, I'm not going to freak out about that right now, even though we saw a little bit too much catch. I'm not going to freak out about it because we didn't see the starting lineup together.
Right.
I didn't think Rocco wasn't. I thought Rocco was coming off the line hard. He just was making freshman mistakes. I thought Blake was playing hard and coming off with some force. So, that's what I'm saying is I want to see this line together first before we kind of start getting to.
That's fair.
He's not going to do a good job.
Hopefully.
But this is a big year for him because if he doesn't do a good job this year, then you got to say, look, 3 of the 4 years
you got to start reevaluating.
You've underachieved to your talent level.
Absolutely. Hopefully we get to see him in practice, but I'm not holding my breath. Okay. Yeah. Ready to jump into some comments / questions.
Let's do it.
We're going completely off the grid here with the first one from Tony, which I think is fantastic. He said, saw an article explaining the parallels between the 21 team and the 2016 team. Now, I think it's a bunch of crap, but I wanted to get your opinion on that. I personally would love to read that argument.
Yeah, Tony, could you do us a favor?
What those parallels are?
Yeah, could you do us a favor? Because I can't speak about an article that I didn't see, and I don't have any premise on what you said. Could you do me a favor and put that article in the chat? Vince, you stay on the top and just keep working through the questions so we don't lose them, and then I'll go try to find that article.
Because I would love to read and see number one, who it is, and number two, how they are parallel. What are they saying? Right. Like, what are those parallels? I'd be interested.
Because that seems kind of absurd to me.
It does to me too, but I want to give whoever it is the benefit of the doubt.
But see, again, I could sit there and crush him. Like anyone comparing 21 to 2016 is an idiot. But what if the thing is more of what we're saying is the similar personnels and how the season started that year, kind of send them into tailspin, so they have to make sure that
changes.
I mean, there's things they could talk about where not that you're predicting 4-8, but hey, look, I have some nervousness because of this, and this. Well, then I could point out times and since then that we've seen heavy losses and they were okay. But and Brian Van Gorder's not the defensive coordinator anymore, so that is another reason. I mean, you think Notre Dame was not good enough for certain positions that year. I mean, there's no Avery Sebastian starting at safety this year. You know what I mean?
That name, yeah.
So but I just and again, I'm not calling that person an idiot because I didn't read the article. I'm just saying it would be unwise for me to do that if I haven't read the context.
Sure.
Because look, if someone could take something, and this actually happens because I have people text me all the time, like so-and-so took a shot at you in his podcast today, and my first response is, my real response is, I don't care. But then always people feel like the need to explain to me what it was, and it's always taking something out of context.
Right.
Well, they said, you think this kid stinks. I've never just said a kid stinks, like ever. I've always explained why I think that, and, and that often so people say, well, Driscoll said this. Well, that's not exactly what I said. I said that jokingly, and if you'd listen to the entire thing, that I'm like, oh, yeah, Kyle Hamilton can't play. Okay. But if somebody just transcribed what I just said, they'd say, Driscoll said Kyle Hamilton can't play. Right?
We know you hate Kyle.
I know, right? But, yeah. Okay, so actually, somebody just sent me the article, Vince. So if you want to go ahead and ask the next question, and I'll kind of read it as
read through it. All right.
Yeah.
Jason Chalanik.
Yep.
He says the running back board has officially shrunk to one player after Hayden and Sawchuk just announced. So that means Singleton is still on the board.
I think part of that is, I'm trying to be careful here, but let's just say I'm not worried about running back right now.
Okay. I like that.
And that means two things. Number one is, as we've said all along, a second running back was not a need in this class.
Sure.
Right? It's a want.
Sure.
I think they're going to be okay. Let's just let it play out. I think they're going to be okay.
D-Rock Irish says, sounds like no additional Irish commits at this time.
No public ones.
I think that's a much better way to put it. Oh, this one's for me, so you can read your article.
Be nice.
What?
Be nice.
I will.
Stick to basketball.
Nick Thilmany says, didn't know Vince coached at the same school as a Notre Dame basketball recruit. Thoughts on him?
That would be Blake Wesley.
That would be Blake Wesley. He came from Riley High School in South Bend, which is where I coach baseball and where I teach. Actually, Blake was in my class a couple years ago because it's a sophomore level class. From a basketball standpoint, Blake is raw. He is athletic as all get out. He is a very good slasher to the basket. I think that he is kind of that new age. He's really athletic. We've got to be on this kid early kind of kid. If he got going and you got in his way, he was going to dunk on your face. Just very athletic around the rim. No question about it. Not a great shooter. He had many opportunities to shoot the ball on his high school team because he was, leaps and bounds better than anybody else on the team. So he took all the shots when he should or shouldn't be taking those shots. And he would actually take shots where, on a normal basketball court, you've got mid-court and then you've got like a logo kind of in the corner, like it's the conference logo or whatever. He would shoot from there just to do it. You know what I mean? While the game was still on the line. So stuff like that I didn't really appreciate, but I think a lot of that is coaching. And at his high school, he had a different coach every single year of his high school career. He had a different head coach. And so I think part of that was, I'm going to do my thing because I'm getting offers and that's cool. And I think coaches had a hard time telling him no. And so he did his own thing. But again, very athletic around the rim. I think that's something that Notre Dame lacks, to be honest with you. And I think that's why a lot of people are very excited about Blake Wesley. Mm-hmm. But he really needs to work on his jump shooting if they're going to ask him to do that. I don't think it's very good. His defense was
streaky.
Good.
He's streaky.
He is streaky.
He reminds me a lot of Jaron Grant as a shooter early in, because remember, Jaron was not a great shooter early in his career either. He was a little streaky too.
Right.
But the thing I like, Vince, I do like is that I do think they need that athleticism.
Sure. And
I also
it's an
think
upgrade.
this. I want to get your opinion on this too, Vince. I think he picked the right school, and what I mean by that is he picked a coaching staff that I think knows how to turn that kind of athlete into a really good shooter.
Okay.
I think that's the one thing Mike Bray's been pretty good at is taking guys like him. Jaron Grant's an example. I mean, he made Demetrius Jackson a better shooter, even though Demetrius was never a great shooter, but he was a much better shooter in college than he was in high school.
Yeah.
Right. I see this is the kind of guy that I think Mike Bray has thrived with, that really ultra athletic guard that needs game refinement.
He definitely needs that. Yes.
And I think him and Rod Balanis and now Anthony Solomon's back. I think this is the perfect situation for him. Plus, the other thing is they're not going to need him to start right away either. So, if anything, what they didn't have, what I thought last year, Vince, is they didn't have him to just come off the bench and score.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I almost think that kind of plays into it because, like, hey, you're only going to play 15 minutes a game. So when you're in there,
well, and I will say his defense, when he wanted to play defense, he was very good
because
defensively.
he's athletic and long.
It wasn't always the case. They would play a box and one a lot of times with him at the top.
Yeah.
And his arms are just – he has an incredible wingspan. He's just very skinny, definitely needs to get in the weight room, things like that. But he has very long wingspan. And so he was able to get his arms in the passing lanes and really disrupt a lot of what other teams wanted to do at the high school level. I think he could be very good defensively. I really do. And I'm not divulging anything crazy here. I'm a little worried about off the court stuff. Right. So hopefully he will have the support that he needs at Notre Dame.
A lot of veterans
cleaned
there.
up. So
a
that's
lot of veterans on that
about.
team that you hope can help with that.
From a basketball standpoint, I think he, like you said, I think he can help Notre Dame. He just needs to be coached up. He needs to be coached. I don't think he's been coached in a very, very long time.
I think him being surrounded by a bunch of people that are as good as him is going to help him too. Because we're going to find out very early how good does this kid want to be.
Oh, for sure.
And if he answers that challenge the right way, he's going to end up being a really good player. So real quick, back to Tony's question, Vince.
Yes. Is that why you were laughing?
That's why I was laughing.
Okay.
First of all, I saw who wrote the article and where it was from.
Okay.
And just
can you divulge that?
I'm not going to say the name, but it's the same guy that wrote that Notre Dame needs to drop the name Fighting Irish because it's culturally insensitive.
Okay.
So that's who wrote this article.
Okay.
And I read about 2 paragraphs and just kind of was like, this is so not worth my time. So Tony, I would just encourage you. That's just not a place you're going to want to ever consume news from, to be honest with you. I'm not going to say who it is, but they used to have some good writers. Those guys are all gone now. Okay. We hired some of them away, but just it's not even worth our time. So let's get to serious questions.
Fair enough.
That was one of the. It's like, remember the scene from Billy Madison? Like, we're all dumber now, basically, for having heard that. That's kind of how I feel about that.
That's pretty funny. D-Rock says it's a shame that Sawchuk couldn't wait until after the Notre Dame visit. Where did he commit to, Brian?
Oklahoma.
Okay. And there you go.
I'll have a lot to say on this after it all plays out. So I know you all hate that, but just let it play out, and then I'll have a lot to say about this situation. It's kind of like KJ Winston's not visiting this weekend. The safety we talked about yesterday.
Right.
After the show, Tom Loy reported that he's not visiting this weekend. Talked to a couple people. That was Notre Dame's decision. So what do you think that means? Right, people? What do you think that means?
To me, that's good news, but I don't know.
Let it play out
when I see it.
Right? Why'd they cancel Sebastian Cheek's visit? Just let it play out.
Right.
Okay? Just let it play out.
Jay says, not putting words in anybody's mouth here. He says Notre Dame staff's told Sawchuk they won't be having any more running backs take officials. They feel good about Singleton.
I'm assuming that you got that from one of the other sites, but I mean, like I said, let it play out. Okay, that's all I can say. Just let it play out.
I love you. All right. Tom says, does Zeke Correll have any positional flexibility? If Patterson is starting at center, is Correll a transfer risk?
Yes. Number one, yes, he has positional flexibility. He was a guard in high school.
Yeah.
And I think I don't really know if there exists such a thing as anymore as a one-trick pony. Actually, to be honest with you, the only guy that I don't think has any positional flexibility is the kid from Marshall. Because he's just a guard.
Yeah,
You know, like he can't play center. He's not athletic enough to play center.
Yeah.
Well, not just that, but he didn't have the feet to play center.
No, he doesn't have the feet to play tackle either.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's not, well, he's like he's listed as 6'3". I guarantee you that kid's not much taller than I am.
Yeah.
I mean, you just see it on film.
Right.
And I'm like, he's 6'3", but yet all these guys listed as 6'2" are like an inch taller than him on the field. I'm just trying to say, like, what's the problem here?
Mm-hmm.
He's not another position. That's okay. We're hoping he's really good at that position. But
sure,
in normal situations, Notre Dame's not recruiting a 6'1", 6'2" kid like Kane Madden. In most situations, if you can play center, you can play guard, and if you can play guard, you can learn to play center. At least most usually. Right. Tackles are even the position where you get the most flexible because it's a lot easier for a tackle to move inside. So, I think Zeke could be a guard. And, we kind of talked about that a little bit during the show. Is maybe this isn't a Zeke Curl's out situation. This is we're going to move Zeke to guard, where he doesn't have to worry about making calls. He doesn't have to worry about snapping. We're just going to let him go play. And we're going to just allow our veteran that we know can snap, that we know can make calls. We're going to let him do that, and we're going to give Zeke a chance to start at center. So it could be as simple as you're just flipping Zeke and Jarrett.
Right.
Because we thought Jarrett was going to be a guard and Zeke is a center. And so it could just be as simple as that. Look, we would rather let Zeke develop as a guard, and then maybe he then moves back to center when Jarrett leaves. Right? Because he's got the experience, and now he'll have some starts under his belt as a guard. There's less pressure as a first-time starter guard than there is as a first-time center. I
can't imagine that they're just throwing Zeke Curl out with the trash.
I'd be surprised by that
after he had some starts last year at center. You know what I mean? Like that just seems like an awful big fall from grace. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like I feel
maybe
like
there's an injury we don't know about somewhere.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's what I'm trying to. I'm not trying to like lose our minds and be like, oh, this is terrible. That's why I'm trying to play devil's advocate to say, look, there's some stuff we may not know about right now. So let's let this thing play out. But I would be shocked, to Vince's point. I'd be shocked if Zeke Curl's just, okay, you're not playing.
Yeah.
I also think we need to get away from this whole is every kid that's not starting a transfer risk. We got to get away from this.
Yeah,
okay?
I agree.
Because otherwise we're going to ask that about what are they, 85 scholarship kids minus 22, so 63 kids that we got to talk about whether the transfer. Well, so you take 59 because there's 4 special teams guys on scholarship, right? So it's just not how it works.
Right, 50
Especially
plus.
Linemen.
Yeah.
You also got to think about Zeke Correll and Andrew Kristofic and Quinn Carroll is they are now technically sophomores again
because of the COVID year,
right? So that may be the pitch. Hey, look, you're still a part of our future. Because of this COVID situation, we're going to treat you like a redshirt freshman again. We're going to put you over here. But look, you still have 3 years
some guys
left.
They're okay with it. Like gives them a chance to get stronger, better, another year in the system.
And the other thing is a lot of these kids, skill players, a lot of these kids, they stay because they came to Notre Dame for a purpose that's beyond football.
Mm-hmm.
Kids that leave usually leave early. Jordan Jefferson. I like Jordan. Jordan's a good player. I don't like how Notre Dame handled that. I think that Jordan's mom is very much in the academic side of things. I think Jordan picked Notre Dame for football. I think Jordan left Notre Dame for football. Right? And so those are the things that you have to look at and say, I don't see Zeke Correll as being a kid that's going to transfer until he gets his degree. It's the same thing with Drew Pine. Look, if Tyler Buckner beats out Drew Pine this year, is Drew Pine going to transfer? I'd be shocked.
Yeah.
Because Drew Pine's a smart kid that comes from a great family. He understands, you're going to get your shot to go play somewhere else someday. But you'd be an idiot to do it now and not wait one more year, get your degree. Mm-hmm. You get the COVID year back. The COVID year is going to change things for a lot of these kids.
Yep.
I'm going to stay and get my degree because I just got an extra year of eligibility.
Mm-hmm.
So, no. I mean, and look, honestly, every kid is a transfer risk once they graduate.
Yes.
If you're not playing, that's when you're going to see kids leave.
Because they'll be able to graduate transfer with 2 years left alive.
Yeah. If you look at all the kids that transferred from Notre Dame this offseason, I mean, Jordan Johnson and Kendall Abdur-Rahman are the only ones I can think of off the top of my head that aren't leaving with a degree from Notre Dame. I'm trying to think of who else might that be. Because Jameer Smith has his degree. Jack Lamb has his degree. Ovia Gofu. Oh, Isaiah Rutherford's the other
degree.
Wow. Yeah.
He's been here that long.
Yeah. Well, he also started. He was an early enrollee.
Right. 3 years, basically. Yeah, but still,
he's a smart kid who took
like he just
a lot
got
of classes. Yeah. Micah Jones got his degree. So 3.
Sure.
Isaiah Rutherford's the other one. I think there's only 3 that left. Notre Dame lost like 10, 11 guys. I think only 3 of them left without their degrees, I believe. I could be wrong on that, but Jay Brunell. But again, his situation wasn't depth chart related.
Yeah, it was different.
It wasn't because he wasn't started. His was a completely different situation. So most of those kids, 2-3 times as many of those kids are leaving with degrees.
Right.
If I know anything about Zeke Correll's not leaving Notre Dame until he's got his degree, unless for some reason he balls out.
Right.
And somebody just sent me a text about Phil Dracovic. I'm talking about this offseason. About this offseason because we're talking about the COVID thing, because the COVID thing has changed this for a lot of people. Because a lot of these kids are going to look at it and say, hey, I didn't lose a year of eligibility. I can stay and get my degree, and I can get the year back, the extra year that I'm staying in Notre Dame to get to my degree. Right. I'm going to get that back because of the COVID year.
Right.
Dracovic left before the COVID situation.
Before all of that nonsense.
Right. So we're talking about this offseason.
All right. Let's see here. Jonathan, back on the running back. Singleton had the highest upgrade in your opinion, correct?
Yes. So my ranking of running backs, because I do it. So for people that are new to the show, I have basically 2 grades for running backs. I grade where they are sort of right now, because that gauges who's ready to kind of step in and play as freshmen, who has the higher floor. The current grade is more about your floor than it is about your ceiling. The second grade is the upside grade, which is ceiling. So for a kid like Nicholas Singleton, the reason he was number 2 on my list, now he's still graded out as a top 100 running back, but I'm a little bit more critical of things in regards to like technique. Mm-hmm. He plays in an option offense where he runs a lot of outside zone, a lot of option. He's caught, I think, like 16 passes his whole career. Now he's rushed for over 4,200 yards in 3 years, but a lot of that's like option stuff. Mm-hmm. So there's going to be footwork things he needs to improve upon. Whereas Dallin Hayden is about a sound fundamental player as I can get. So like those grades, Dallin grades out a lot higher than Nicholas does in those areas. That's where that separation comes from. But if you look at Nicholas, he grades out higher in size, in explosiveness, speed, those kind of things. But the intangibles, the technique, the footwork, all those kind of things, Dallin's way ahead of him. That's why his grade is higher now. But that's also why I created the upside grade. Right. Because the upside grade says, maybe Nicholas Singleton isn't a beast as a freshman, but when it's all said and done, when you look 2, 3, 4 years down the road, this is the guy that I think is going to be the best. He's the only running back I had on my board in the 2022 class that had a 5-star upside grade. The only one. I didn't give it to Gavin Sawchuk, Dallin Hayden. Everybody knows I love Dallin Hayden as a runner. I mean, that's a given. But Nicholas Singleton's the only one that I gave a 5-star upside grade. And what do I always say about here? If I got to err on the side of taking the guy with the higher floor or the guy with the higher ceiling, I'm almost always going to take the guy with the higher ceiling. The only exceptions would be if I need a freshman to play.
Right.
If it's a position where, like, look, I love this kid's upside, but we need a guy that can play right now. Our depth chart's a mess, right? That's the only time I would really I would do that, is if that were the case. That's not the case here. If you're Notre Dame, like I had Hayden 1, Notre Dame didn't have him 1. They didn't. They had Singleton 1 and Sawchuk 2 and Hayden 3. I can say that now because those 2 kids picked other schools.
Right.
The reason for that is, now they would have taken any of them. From what I understand, they would have taken in if one guy wanted to commit. If Dallin Hayden wanted to commit to Notre Dame after his visit, my understanding is they would have taken the commitment.
Sure.
But as far as that, because what I have been able to gather is they saw it the same way I saw it, which is one guy has a much higher ceiling than the other, than the other 2. And that's what they were looking for. Because, again, the second running back wasn't a need. They got Estime. They got Diggs. They got Jadarian Price. They got Chris Tyree. They don't need another running back. They wanted another running back. And that's why I was told they like Singleton so much, which is why I'm not saying anything else because I was about to give some crap away. I apologize. But that's why they keyed on Singleton so much, is because they saw him as, if you're going to play in this backfield, you better have a really high ceiling to beat out Audric. I mean, Audric Estime looks like a grown friggin' man. I mean, have you seen pictures of him this summer? He looks like he's like a year away from being past his prime in the NFL. Like, that's how old he looks. Like, he's a grown man. If you're going to beat that dude out, if you're going to beat Logan Diggs out, if you're going to beat Jadarian Price out, you better be a dude. Yeah. And that's what the staff was focusing on, in my opinion. And I see it the same way they saw it. Is, my ranking of where they are now is different, but our rankings of who has the higher ceilings, we were on the exact same page. And it was Singleton had the highest ceiling, and it was by quite a bit, in my opinion. Plus, he's super experienced. He's got over 4,200 yards rushing in his career. He's ran for at least 1,200 yards in every year of his career. He only rushed for 1,300 yards this year.
Is that
in
all?
8 games. He averaged 12.5 yards per carry. He had 22 or 24 touchdowns in 8 games this year. And he plays against good competition. They play against like Pine Richland. They play against good teams.
Okay. Oh, here we go. Nathan Wilson says, been listening to the podcast for a while. First time commenter. Love the show. Keep up the good work, guys. Thanks,
Welcome
Nathan.
to the show, Nathan. Even though you've always been a listener, you're now officially, you got your name in there now. You're now official. You're now officially part of the crew.
Thanks for commenting, Nathan. We appreciate that. Coleman says, Jeff Quinn really is disappointing on the trail. However, it seems like developing the junior class is even worse.
I mean,
jury's out.
Let's let it play out on both.
Right.
Okay. Let's let it play out on both, because here's the deal. If they go out and get Billy Schrouth and Carson Hinsman, and you could make a case that Joey Tanona or Ty Chan are the 4th best lineman in a recruiting class, you're not going to find many people with better recruiting classes from that. Right. Same thing if they get like Joe Bruner. If they get Joe Bruner, I'd probably rank Joe Bruner. So like, let's say they get Schrouth and Bruner and they don't get Hinsman. I'd probably rank Joe Bruner 4th on that list. He's a consensus top 100 recruit. If that's your 4th guy on my view, that's a pretty good flipping class.
Yeah.
Now, if they miss on those guys, and here's the thing, if they get 2 of those guys, that means you got a couple kids you beat Wisconsin for a couple top 100 linemen from Wisconsin. So let's let this class, now if he misses on those guys, if he misses on Hinsman and misses on Schrouth, and maybe they only get 1 of those Wisconsin guys and they kind of got to go for a project next, yeah, then we can have this conversation. But it's hard for me to say for sure, because I need to let it play out a little bit. Okay. He had to prove his chops as a coach before he was really going to crush it on the recruiting trail, right? Because every team was saying, hey, he's not here, he's staying, right? There's a reason. Other teams are saying about Jeff Quinn to recruits the same thing that we were saying on the show about Jeff Quinn. There's a reason in 3 years he was just an analyst at Notre Dame and nobody hired him. There's a reason for that, right?
Sure.
Fair or not, that's a criticism.
It's just a fact. Yeah, right.
And so you could say, okay, maybe that's why they missed on some things. And he was kind of getting back in the groove of recruiting. He hadn't coached in a while. And then when he was a coach before that, before the analyst thing, he was a head coach, right? He hadn't been an offensive line coach since 2009. It's kind of like riding a bike, but sometimes, the bike's a little, wobbly the first couple, blocks around the house. You got to get your feet underneath you. So there's all types of things we could justify to say, hey, here's why he didn't do as well and whatever. So if he bounces back now in his 3rd full year and he puts together what could probably be his best line class top to bottom, I mean, he's not going to have a 1-2 like he did last year. I mean, I don't think if they got Zach Rice or Jake Taylor, that number 1's not as good as their number 1 last year.
Yeah, right. And that's fair.
But that's a really deep class. So I can sit there and say, man, June 22nd, and he only has 2 linemen, and they haven't signed this guy, and I could hammer him, crush him. And as of today, I'm look accurate. But if in a month they have commitments from Billy Schrouth and Carson Hinsman, or Billy Schrouth and Joe Bruner, or Carson Hinsman and Joe Bruner, I'm going to look like an idiot for saying that. Right? So let's let it play out. Right? Let's let it play out. And then if they miss on guys, and we can have that conversation. If they get those guys, and we can feel better about them, maybe he's better than I think he is. I think the point about the developing the juniors, again, based on what we saw in the spring, agree with you 100%. But let's see what happens in the fall. Let's see what he laid the foundation in the spring. Let's kind of see what he goes out there and what he can do, and if he can take that next step. Again, I have my concerns, Coleman. I share your similar concerns. I'm not willing to be as aggressive as maybe I have been in the past about it, because what he did in 2020 earned him a bit of a grace, right? It did. And so let's just let it play out. And if it pans out how you think it might pan out, Coleman, then I think we can be at the point where we can be very critical. But I can't bang him for a recruiting class that hasn't been completed yet.
True. There's still a lot to be done there.
And there's still dudes. It's not like they missed on those guys. Like, those guys have now committed elsewhere.
Right.
If those guys all go commit elsewhere, then we can have this conversation.
Right.
If this class involves like Ryan Baer and Ashton Craig and guys like that, then we can sit there and say, yeah, this is a problem.
Right.
But let's just let it play out first a little bit.
Fortnite Blaze says Vince's face while Brian was going on his Wu-Tang rant yesterday was priceless.
It's not my fault. Vince has no appreciation for real music.
It was probably the face of somebody who had no idea what he was talking about. Sorry,
You're lucky we became friends before I knew that.
I know. All right. Coleman says, besides Blake and Rocco last year, really, you're the Notre Dame offensive line coach, and all you get to fill the class out is Pat Coogan, Joe Alt, and Caleb Johnson to finish the class.
Fair. It's a fair criticism and one that I offered. So I don't disagree with you on that. But again, that was his second full class.
Right.
He did get Rocco Spindler and Blake Fisher. I mean, we
can't
dismiss that.
Right.
I do like Joe Alt's upside. My issue is more of the Johnson Coogan thing.
Sure.
And then, not prioritizing, Wyatt Milam and guys like that. I mean, again, Coleman, I get all that. And I'm not even saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying it's kind of like, I hope that a teacher wouldn't grade me when I'm halfway through a test. You know what I mean?
It's only if I've done really well in the first half.
But even if I did, I got to finish it, right? Like Notre Dame's off to a good start. They have 2 top 100 linemen in their class.
Yeah, you're right.
Right?
You're right.
So halfway through the test, it's pretty good. But if I can say, hey, dude, half your questions are wrong. Well, it's because I haven't answered them yet. Because we still have another half an hour left in the test. So I don't necessarily disagree with anything that you're saying, Coleman. I don't. But what I'm saying is we need to let them at least fill the class out before we see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the concerns you have, I agree with. They have after the top 2 in each of the last 2 classes, it's been a challenge. Okay. But this class has a chance to be different. If they miss out on Shrouth and Hinsman and Bruner, then we can have a different conversation. So again, I'm not disagreeing with you necessarily. I'm just saying let's let it play out a little bit.
Spartan B88. Fisher left tackle, Patterson left guard, Carell at center, Madden right guard, Lug right tackle. Spindler is the first center guard, Baker first in at tackle in game with a bye between games. Would they kick Patterson out to tackle and reconfigure?
No. If they start Patterson at guard, the only place they'd move him to, in my opinion, would be back to center.
Yep.
Yeah. I think some things would have to go what could they do that if it's a situation where Tosh isn't ready? Yeah, I think they'd have to consider that. I think they would. Like, let's say Lug gets hurt and Tosh isn't ready. You have to think about moving Jared out there.
Yeah.
It's either that or you move Christophic or Quinn Carroll out there, which could be another option. Because again, here's the dilemma that coaches get into in the situation like that. Do I screw with 2 positions or just 1?
Right.
And that's the decision that Notre Dame made last year when they didn't move Robert Hainsey to center. From what I was told, and I can say this now, he went to Notre Dame and said, hey, move. I'm willing to move because, it's Robert Hainsey. He's a leader and he can play anywhere.
Right.
And that's just the kind of kid he was. And they said, no, we don't want to screw with 2 positions. Now, I didn't necessarily agree with that because I think, you would have been not as good at right tackle, but your combination of being good at both spots would have been better than one great right tackle and a really big problem at center, which is what they had.
Right.
So that's after Zeke got hurt. This conversation is about after Zeke Carell got hurt.
This
about
is putting Josh Lugg at center.
Right. This wasn't when Jared Patterson got hurt. This was after Zeke got hurt.
Right.
So you were down 2 centers. You're only 2 true centers on the team because you didn't have Colin. They didn't play. I think Colin Grunhard was hurt too. So anyway, that's what that was. So I think that would be the difficulty. And based on what we saw this year, I don't think they would move Jarrett Patterson out to tackle in that situation because I think they would view it as, okay, now we're weakening ourselves at 2 positions.
Yeah.
I think what you would see is I think Rocco could play right tackle in a pinch. I've said this when he signed. He's not a pure tackle, but could he play tackle in a pinch? Yeah. But you also have Christophic spent his whole first 2 years at Notre Dame playing tackle. Quinn Carroll played his first 2 years at tackle. So I think what you'd probably see is let those guys move out there, and then they're still solid at the other 4 positions is what I think you would see.
Justin Knox, sup, fellas? Been on vacation in Yosemite for the last week. Missed the show. Great to have it back on my screen. Great to have it back, Justin.
Well, the nice news is everything, Justin, everything is archived. So you can get caught up. The problem is the shows are so stinking long that it takes a while to get through them all. But it also means you have plenty to do now that you're back. But we're glad to have you back safe and sound.
And Yosemite, so I want to know, Justin, you can throw this later on in the chat. Was it like crazy busy, like they're saying on the news, like all the national parks and stuff have like just been overloaded with people who just have cabin fever and all that? I'm curious as to how it went with you, but welcome back. We appreciate you being back. Let's see here. Coleman says when you had Tangwell, Millam, Rucci, and many more on the board, and if you would have pushed for some of them that had ND in their top 4, we would have had an elite group.
Again, we've talked about all this. We've rehashed all this, right? I've lobbed my criticisms at Jeff Quinn for this. I get it. Again, I get it. I'm just saying, let's let this class play out, right? Because look, we've seen Kerry Cooks, his first couple years in Notre Dame, had some really big misses in recruiting. But by the end of his time in Notre Dame, he kind of hit his stride, right?
Sure.
So I mean, every coach improves and develops. And just because Jeff Quinn struggled his first 2 classes, and I believe that he did, doesn't mean that I'm just, okay, that's all he's ever going to be at Notre Dame. If this class, again, comes up short, then we can have that conversation.
Sure, absolutely.
So I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I'm just saying, let's let this class play out. We've already rehashed last year's class. We've already talked about that. I've already dinged him for that. I've dinged him for what he did in 2018 and 2019, but it doesn't guarantee that we're going to see that again in 2020 or 2021. Right. We have to at least be open-minded enough to see it happens. And if we see it again, then we'll criticize it again. But right now, it's just, look, there are 3 guys still out there uncommitted that Notre Dame has a legitimate chance at that are going to completely change how we view this class.
Right.
And that's Carson Hinsman, Billy Schrouth, and Joe Bruner. Bruner's a consensus top 100 pick. Hinsman's the number 88 player in the country in Rivals, and I think he's a top 100 to 150 kind of guy. And I think Billy Schrouth is better than both of them. And he's a top 150 guy. If they get 2 of those 3 guys, then the focus needs to be on, holy moly, they put together one heck of an offensive line class.
Sure.
Okay?
Agreed.
If he doesn't do that, then we can get back to saying, okay, am I nervous about it? Yeah, I'm nervous about it. I am. I'm not going to lie. But I think we at least need to say, let's let it play out before we kind of get there. And again, there's a lot of comments about Coach Quinn and those kind of things in the thing. I don't want this to turn into a Jeff Quinn bashing session. No. My opinion of Jeff Quinn is very well known. I just don't want to necessarily, because again, I do think what he did last year deserves him to have a little bit of
breathing room. Yeah, right.
Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. And then we'll get in the first 4 or 5 games and we may change that. I mean, it may have been Chris Watt's influence. It may have been Harry Heastand's influence. It also could have been that Jeff Quinn has said, hey, you know what? We struggled the first 2 years.
Yeah.
I didn't coach this group as well as I thought I have. He goes back in the offseason. He makes changes to his coaching style, and they're a better group now.
Mm-hmm.
We need to give him that opportunity. If you see them revert back to those old habits, then we can say it was the Harry Heastand effect.
Right.
But I do think he earned, even in the title game, say what you want about Notre Dame losing to Bama, that offensive line equated itself really well in that game. They battled. They played well. I mean, they ran for over 100 yards in the first half against Alabama when everybody in the building knew that Notre Dame wasn't throwing the ball, right? And they still ran on Bama. Second half, the game got a little out of hand and they couldn't do it. But that's all I'm saying. Like, you all know my opinion of Jeff Quinn, but I think he earned a little bit of a let's see how things play out in the fall from all of us. And now, again, that doesn't mean if it struggles, because that 1 out of 3 years doesn't erase the other 2 years. So if 2021 looks like 2019 and 2018, then we have a problem, right?
And we'll tell you,
but we don't know if it's going to be that yet. So that's all I'm saying. And this recruiting class could end up being the nation's best offensive line class. It could.
Give it a second.
But if it isn't, then we have a problem. But it's incomplete right now. That's all I'm saying.
Notre Dame 2164. Just letting you guys know that I'm still watching the full show even on vacation. Even though I may not get to watch it all live, I still get my IB fix one way or the other.
I love it. I love it.
That's awesome.
He's in Panama City, right? Isn't that where he is? And he's still listening to the show. I'm digging it.
That's
Vince
awesome.
doesn't pay attention.
I don't know where
because he's rubbed it in our face like 3 times in the last this week already.
Well, I'm just jealous that
just to let you know, I'm in Panama City Beach watching the show. Like, okay, I see how it is. I'm jealous.
Let's see here. A lot of people wishing good prayers.
To
Jeff, which is
he did say
fantastic.
It's just a knee injury for the wife.
Yes,
so that's a positive sign.
And no wonder. That means all the faculties are there, and that's why she's telling them to stop bugging her, which I think is hilarious.
Yeah, exactly, I love it. Coleman Smith. This is the last one we're going to do on this. In high school, however, Coach, would you take the 2018 class, the 2021 class? 2020 is so top heavy and has a major drop off. I will absolutely take the 2021 class. because the 2018 class, you had Jarrett Patterson, right? Best lineman in that class. With all due respect to Jarrett Patterson's not close to the prospect that Blake Fisher was coming out of high school. And you look at Rocco Spindler. Who was the number 2 lineman in that 2018 class? Was it John Dirksen? Was it Cole Mabry? Was it Luke Jones? I'm taking Rocco over Jarrett Patterson, much less the number 2 guy.
Yeah.
And then you look at like Joe Alt and you compare him to Cole Mabry. Well, I liked Cole Mabry coming out. I like Joe Alt better. So again, the class was not up to the standard of what you expect from a Notre Dame class to be. Right. It was still a good class. It was still better than the 2018 class. Now, part of the deal with the 2018 class and why it was down, it was a down year nationally in offensive line. It was not a great offensive line class, period.
Sure.
You'd have had to bat like 800 to have a great offensive line class in that year. And you know, and so it didn't. And I think part of the problem was Coach Heastan knew he was, you know, maybe he was going to be out, but he also then shifted early folks to 2019. And when he left and Jeff Quinn would arrived, they were the leaders for Kristofic, they were the leaders for Zeke Correll, and they were the leaders for Quinn Carroll. He knew that 2018 class was not good. And not good like those kids couldn't play. I'm talking about nationally. It was not a great class. So they took some projects. They took John Turkson. They took Cole Mabry, guys that they liked, but guys that had lower ceilings and higher floors. As we've said, when you have a class filled with low floor, high ceiling guys, your bust potential is even greater.
Sure.
And so that's why if Coach Heastan was still here, you'd have the kid from Ohio State who would be starting, and Jarrett Patterson wouldn't be at Notre Dame. But then Quinn came, they lost that kid, and they did well to recover and get Jarrett Patterson. I mean, it was a really good job. So
sure,
I understand what you're saying, but yeah, I would absolutely take the 2021 class. I mean, the 1-2 punch of 2021 was arguably as good as any 1-2 punch they've had, other than the only 1-2 punches I would guarantee say definitely better is 2014 with Quentin Nelson and Alex Bars. That was a better 1-2 punch. I think the 2021 is on this, you know, we could debate the Eichenberg-Tommy Kramer 1-2 punch. We could debate that. I'd probably take the Eichenberg-Kramer one from a floor, but I think the ceiling is higher with this group, with Blake, with Rocco and Blake. Sure. Blake has the tools to be the best left tackle Notre Dame's had in the last 20 years. That's how good he is. Yep. Now, is he going to become that?
We'll see.
That's a long way to go because you're talking about a bunch of first-round picks.
Yeah.
But the talent is there.
Right.
So again, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you on a lot of these things, Coleman. It's just for right now, let's let this thing play out first before we go to that next level. And then we're going to kind of leave that issue now behind. I think we've addressed it enough.
Jeff says, thanks again. Found this chat a few days ago and love it. He goes, by the way, my wife is tougher than most men I know, so she'll be okay. So that's awesome.
I have a mom like that and a wife like that. My wife, Vince, did you know this? My wife, actually, when we first met, she was a firefighter.
I did know that.
She actually went through the fire academy. She was actually a line firefighter. And then when we met, she had taken a job with the public education part of it. But yeah, she's Italian and she was a firefighter. So I love that. I'm not a mess. I had to marry somebody tough. Put up with me, you had to be pretty tough. And my mom's that way. My mom was like in karate tournaments when I was a kid. I was like, my dad's like 6'3", big guy. Nobody was afraid of my dad. It's like when mom was like, wait till your dad gets home. I was like, mom's not going to spank us. You know, I shouldn't say that. She's going to get mad at me. I didn't get spanked that much as a kid, but mom was intimidating because I see her karate tournaments taking. And it wasn't in a women's league. Yeah. She was like the only woman in a man's karate league.
That's
I like tough women. So I'd like your wife, Jeff, in a respectful kind of way.
Yes. This isn't your personal dating site. All right, Brian. I was kidding. Yeah.
It was a line cross.
Oh, come on. That was a joke. Okay. All right. Elijah says, I don't know if I missed it, but do you think Rocco has a good chance to start if Patterson starts at center?
Yeah, I'd say he's going to be in that battle. I mean, will he win the job? That's got to be earned. But I think they're hoping that Rocco forces his way on the field this year because he's that good. I mean, he's a really good player and he's huge, you know, and he's the big you want. He's like a Liam Eichenberg big. He's like, you know, he's not like a big chunky kid you got to work some weight off of. Rocco's just broad shoulder, big hands, big thighs, big calves, all of it. He's a big kid, really big kid.
Let's see here. Coleman says, I think Rocco and Blake can hold their own on the left side, and Madden plays right guard with Lugg at right tackle. Obviously, Patterson at center. What do y'all think? I think that's the way it's trending right now. Yeah. I mean, based on everything that we're hearing, I mean, I don't know if they're going to be good, bad, or indifferent. Just because we don't. There's so many question marks,
and I don't think you want a left side of your line that can hold their own. And that's kind of like, well, we survived. It's kind of
right.
It's like getting into a boxing match. And I went 12 rounds. I got beat every round, but I went 12 rounds.
Surviving is not enough.
Yeah, you need. Yeah, but I mean, I think by November, if Rocco starts in game 1, I think for the first half of the season, we're going to see some issues at left guard and left tackle. We're going to see some misses, some mistakes. But I think the key is by November, they've worked a lot of that stuff out, and you've got 2 big, talented linemen, and that's what they're looking for.
Zachary says he can't wait to see Blake pancake people this year. I'm looking forward to that myself. Sean,
did you not get that reference?
Blake, yes, I completely understand. That's one of my favorite comedy sketches.
One of the best
all time.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So I'm on board with you there. I am on board with you there. I've broken a few clipboards in my day as well. Left tackle. Sean says left tackle.
You want to go to war, Blocky? Sorry,
I've taught the inner city for over 20 years. I can't wait. I'm about 16 years teaching in the inner city. When I get to 20, I might have to yell at my kids that way. So just saying. Great. Sean says left tackle Fisher, left guard Madden, center Patterson, right guard Rocco, right tackle Lugg. I don't want to steal Brian's words here, but he made a good point earlier when he said that, look, you're bringing in a guy who's been playing right guard his entire career as a second-team All-American at right guard. You're probably not going to move him to left guard. Mm-hmm. It's just I would be surprised if that was the case.
I mean, I don't think it'd be bad.
I don't think it'd be bad either. I just
like
don't see him doing it.
And I think that's partly why you want to have Jarrett Patterson at center. In their view is we need as many knowns as possible. Sure. If we have question marks with all these other guys, you need as many knowns as possible. Josh Lugg is a known at right tackle, right? Kane Madden is a known at right guard. Now, known for Notre Dame level? No. But as far as we know he can play right-handed. Jarrett Patterson is a known at center. Correct. And I'm sympathetic to the notion of when there are questions and maybe some other guys didn't step up like you hoped, whether it's their fault or Jeff Quinn's fault or both.
Then you go with experience.
You need to go with the knowns. And that we're going to have who's going to be at left tackle. Now, he's unknown as far as we can do, but there's no question that Blake Fisher is going to be your left tackle. I think there's this is the kind of year where coaches start kind of, I don't want to say panic a little bit, but it's like, okay, yeah, we experimented in the spring because there wasn't a game on the line, but now there's a game on the line. We need to figure out what we're going to do.
The stakes are higher. I mean, I get that.
No question. No question.
Allison,
you try something in the spring that doesn't pan out, you're like, okay,
it doesn't matter.
Fix it. You try something in the fall camp and it doesn't work out. It's like, well, got to update the old resume.
Yeah, right. That's jobs. It's a job situation. Yeah, I totally get that, man. Allison T says, how did you evaluate Tommy Kramer coming out of high school, and how did he compare to your expectations?
About what he was, minus the injuries. I mean, the thing about Tommy is what we have to understand is, I think I said I was going to say this after the draft, and we never talked. No one asked about it again, but what people don't understand now that Tommy went through the draft, he went undrafted. Tommy Kramer went undrafted because of his medicals. He had a shoulder, a back. I mean, he had a knee. He had a lot of issues. That kid, for all intents and purposes, shouldn't have played last year.
Yeah.
I mean, he just shouldn't have, medically speaking. I'm not saying that the Notre Dame coaches shouldn't have played him or he shouldn't have played. I'm just saying, medically speaking, there's not a lot of people that could have made it through almost an entire year with what he was dealing with before the season even started. That just speaks to his toughness and also his desire to say, I'm going out with my boys. Mm-hmm. I'm going out with my teammates, and I'm going to have to literally be broken to not play. And I
love that.
That's pretty much what it was. And so before the injuries really set in, he was a little up and down. I thought his best year, in my opinion, was actually 2017 when he was a right tackle because he was just so physical. They didn't throw it a ton, and that was kind of Tommy's issue as pass pro. He wasn't great in pass pro. They didn't throw it a ton in 2017, but he was a real physical run blocker. In 2019-18, he was really up and down. Remember, he got benched at one point, like late in the year, for a couple games, and Trevor Rulin got hurt, and then he came back and he played well. I thought Tommy Kramer did some good things in 2019. I think he did some good things this year. This was probably his most steady year, but he was never the dominant run blocker later in his career that he was as a redshirt freshman. And that's what I loved about him in high school, to Allison's question. I thought he was a very physical. I always thought he was a guard. I never thought he was a tackle.
Yeah.
And the injuries just kind of took away some of that punch because he had so many like shoulder and upper body injuries that it sapped him of a lot of that power.
Mm-hmm.
And he just was never the same kid. He's still good. I mean, the fact that he was able to start, he's kind of like the offensive line version of Sean Crawford. It's just on offensive line, you can play through things you can't play through as a DB.
Right. Yeah.
And that's kind of how I feel about him.
Can you grab that super chat, Brian?
It's from Brandon. Brandon says, just joined and saw Sawchuck. I knew Brandon was going to ask about this. As soon as I saw you, I stood the super chat up, but we didn't see any questions earlier. I knew that he got in late. I was going to ask about this. Just joined and saw Sawchuck is committed to Oklahoma. Thoughts? Also, how important now is it that Notre Dame seals the deal with Singleton? Do you believe they will? Brandon, I haven't said a lot about it other than just let it play out, because what I did say is you have to – I don't think, from people I've talked to, I don't think Gavin Sawchuck commits to Oklahoma without visiting Notre Dame, without a circumstance changing. Is that a fair way of saying? I didn't say that.
I'm putting words in your mouth.
Don't put words in my mouth. Trust me, I have plenty of my own words. I'm never at a loss for words. Well, sometimes, but rarely at a loss for words. But, to me, I look at it and I say, there's a reason things have changed. It's like there's a reason that they didn't bring KJ Winston on campus this weekend, or they're not going to bring KJ Winston on campus this weekend. There's a reason they canceled the visit with Nakai Martinez. There's a reason they canceled the visit with Nick Singleton. So there's reasons for that. I'm not going to get into what those are for obvious reasons. You guys know how I am, but all I'll say is just let it play out. Okay. Let it play out. I feel good about where things stand. And honestly, at the end of the day, even if they do miss out, they're going to be fine because they've done a really good job, in my opinion, of recruiting running back to where the second running back in this class is not a need. It's a want. But I feel good about where things stand. That's as much as I can say. I think I've put as many tea leaves out there as possible without saying what, beyond that. All right, John Long says, come on, BK. You have to see this lack of offensive recruiting. I sincerely believe if not for the defensive surge, I believe Notre Dame would be in decline. BD once said something like it. It's hard to stay even. Yeah, it is hard to stay even. But, again, in Coach Kelly's defense, I don't think he sees the decline on offensive recruiting the way I think he should, because I don't think he realizes how good Chip Long was. And I think he thinks Jeff Quinn is Harry Heastan when I don't. However, I do believe Brian Kelly understands that recruiting has to be more of an emphasis. And the reason that I say that is no other reason other than he's more involved now. And so I think that's important. Look, yes, Marcus Freeman has been a big part of what's going on, and he deserves a ton of credit for that. I think Mike Elson being the recruiting coordinator has been a big part of it as well. But at the end of the day, it's not a coincidence that Notre Dame is in the midst of putting together arguably its best class of Brian Kelly's tenure, a potential top 5 class in the year where Brian Kelly's the most involved in recruiting that he's been in his career. That's not a coincidence. That's why if I didn't think Brian Kelly could move the needle as a recruiter, I would not have been arguing for all these years to have him more involved. So, yeah, I think that there's some issues in offensive recruiting, but again, if they make smart choices, this skill class could end up being outstanding. I think they have a great shot at Tobias Merriweather. He's the number 1 receiver on my board. He's a top 100 recruit, arguably top 50 recruit in my opinion. If they want Xavion Bradshaw, they will get Xavion Bradshaw. And then you got the tight ends. You got Jadarian Price. I feel good about the running back situation. Beyond that, it's about making smart choices, but the players are on the board for them to get this done. It's just about whether or not they're going to be able to finish and get it done. Liam Burke says, I like Zeke at center and Patterson at guard. When Zeke was in, he held his own, and we know what Patterson brings. I agree with that, Liam, but I also think a case could be made, and I don't necessarily say I agree with it, but I think a case could be made that that's exactly why they're going to move Zeke to could. We don't know if this is going to happen. This is just us kind of projecting based on things we're hearing of what may happen. We're not saying it's going to happen, but based on what you said, they do know what Patterson brings as a center. What they don't know is what Patterson would bring as a guard. Now, you may think he'll do great. I think he would do great. I think he'd do very well at tackle. But he's a big-time guard. If you do like Zeke, there's a case to be made that moving him to guard is better for him because he is a little undersized. He doesn't have to worry about playing one-handed. As we talked about in the show yesterday, when we were talking about offensive line recruits, the reason I like Carson Hinsman is because he can play one-handed. He's got a really strong punch. He's got more meat on him than Zeke Crow had at the same age,
right?
Where he can snap and step with power with one hand. Zeke Correll's a little undersized. Maybe that's an issue for him. Where now, if he's a guard, again, all conjecture. If he's a guard, he can come off and he can play two-handed more, and he can kind of not have to worry about stepping, which means he's firing off really well. So again, if I'm playing devil's advocate, I expressed my concerns at the beginning of the show, but then I'm playing the counter argument to where if this is ultimately what Notre Dame is doing, then I think that makes some sense because now that that could actually help Zeke. And remember, Zeke wasn't a center in high school, so it's not like he doesn't have experience playing guard. That would be a pretty smooth transition for him. And you need me to grab that.
Yes,
we're
sir.
with Liam Burke at 148, Vince.
Yep, I got it.
John Climax says, first of all, thank you for the super chat. Appreciate the one from Brandon as well. John says, you guys are making this drive to Chicago for the Cubs game a lot easier.
Going to watch the Cubbies play the Indians. Very nice. Got to win tonight.
Nice.
Got to split that 2-gamer.
I gave up on the baseball season before it started. I'm a Reds fan. What can I say?
Well, he shouldn't. They had a great offseason. It's just not really showing up.
Well, they didn't. Look at all the guys they got rid of. Are you kidding me?
They got to go. Well, yeah, you're right. Maybe was that last year that they had a great offseason?
2 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, okay.
They went and got like Sonny Gray and they traded for Tyler Mayle, right? Or not Tyler. I mean Trevor Bauer.
Yeah, right. Not Trevor Bauer.
And then kept him the next year and all that kind of stuff. And I want to Cy Young. Let's let him walk.
David says, all you in the chat have great ideas for lineups. What a task for the coaching staff to decide on a final lineup.
I think the good thing is that there are a lot of options.
Right.
That's a good problem to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good problem to have.
Coleman says, not going to lie, when I watched Blake's footwork at 325, 330, I was shocked. A 330-pound man should not – he said a 330-pound man should not move like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's right.
There's no doubt.
Tommy says, hopefully it doesn't take 3 games into the season to figure it all out, though.
It may not, but it may, though, right? Like, I mean, at the end of the day, Tommy, the thing is guys may look great in practice. You may think you know what your lineup is going to be, but then they get to Saturdays, and this is a fact. Not everybody plays as well on Saturday as they do on Wednesday. I mean, that's a fact.
Right.
Some guys, and we've talked about this at quarterback. I think a big reason why Ian Book was always going to be the starter over Phil Dracovic is because Ian Book was a way better player Monday to Friday. I think Phil Dracovic's a better player on Saturdays.
Right.
And Notre Dame is valued at certain positions the Monday to Friday guys. That's okay. Whatever. It is what it is.
Yep.
That may be true here. You may have guys that really play well on Monday to Friday, and then you get to Saturday and you don't know. But how can you possibly know that without getting to Saturday?
Right.
And so, you can't fault them for that. I mean, kid just didn't, step up. So I think what it would say is if they don't know what the lineup is going to be,
sure,
and it takes 3 games, that's a problem. But there's a scenario where you even no matter if they play the same lineup from day 1 of fall camp till September 5th, they still aren't going to know what their line's going to be like until they get to Saturday. Actually, and that ends as to be a Sunday.
Got to see them, yeah,
right. So that's the thing is, and it may require some tweaking. And some guy, they may have some guy that gets in there and like, we're concerned about this guy, and you're doing a rotation, and then the kid gets to Saturday and he's been making a bunch of mistakes Monday to Friday, and he gets out there on Saturday and he's one of those. He's a game day guy.
Right.
Just dominates.
Right.
That stuff happens.
Travis Miner, my son had a girlfriend who went to high school with Blake Fisher. She told him that Blake was overrated and really not any good. He no longer has a girlfriend who went to high school with Blake Fisher.
Smart kid.
It's the best,
smart
that's the best story, Travis. That is great. And just the way that you delivered it, by the way.
Oh, that's awesome. My son had a girlfriend who went to high school with Blake Fisher. She told him that Blake Fisher was overrated and not any good. He no longer has a girlfriend who went. See, that's a double-edged sword, though, because part of me is like, what are you, nuts? Like, I question your entire decision-making to be able to make a statement like that. The other part of it is he had a girlfriend that thought enough about football recruiting that she had an opinion on Blake Fisher.
She had an opinion on Blake Fisher, yeah, absolutely.
It's just like, Yeah, the stupidity of your comment wins out over the fact that you love football. I can find another girl that loves football. There's a lot of them out there. You'd be surprised. And
It's great.
Yeah, the person I like talking sports with the most in high school was one of my best friends in high school was a girl named Courtney Sweet. She actually covers I think Big West basketball out in California. Like I'd talk sports with her over any of my guy friends who had their stupid opinions about things. But
absolutely.
Yeah, that's funny. No longer has a girlfriend that went to high school with Blake Fisher. That's great. That's great.
D-Rock Irish says, I feel we always head into Notre Dame fall camp. We are in the stock market with questions and uncertainty in position groups. Remember the saying, past performance is no guarantee of future results.
Most teams are that way. Most teams are that way. Most teams go into the offseason, unless you're returning like 19, 20 starters, you're always going into the offseason. That's one of the things I love about college football, to be honest with you. It's because everybody's only there like 3 to 5 years. You're always going to have turnover. Your team's never going to – in the NFL, it's like once you sign your franchise quarterback, you know who's going to be starting a quarterback for you for 10 years. Whereas in one offseason, Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson all lost their quarterbacks. Notre Dame – actually, think about it. All 4 playoff teams last year lost their quarterbacks. That doesn't happen in the NFL. You don't have the 2 AFC title game teams and the 2 NFC title game teams all lost their quarterbacks in one offseason. That's the one thing that makes it fun, but that also is one of those things that makes it a little bit nerve-wracking when you go into the season. It's like, as a coach, it's like, well,
right.
I hope it works out. And to Vince's point, you don't really know until there's something on the line.
Exactly.
Because your first real game against a team in a different uniform is when it matters.
Yep. Kyle Stewart says, I work with Caden Madden's friend from high school, and we both talked about how the ACC is a whole different animal than being at Marshall.
Oh, yeah.
Just a little bit. You can say what you want to about the ACC. The competition is still stronger than the competition that Marshall plays.
The ACC is a very underrated league, in my opinion. It's a lot better than people give it credit for. But to your point, it is way better than Conference USA. And it's not like Notre Dame plays 12 ACC teams. They play 2 Pac-12 teams. They're playing a Big Ten team this year.
Right.
They play teams from every conference. There was a year recently that most years they play 4 teams. In most years, Notre Dame will play 4 of the Power 5 conference. This year, I think they only play 3. I don't think they play an SEC team this year. Am I forgetting somebody? They don't play an SEC team, and they don't play a Big 12 team.
Right.
But they play a Big 10 team. They play ACC teams. They play Pac-12 teams.
Yep.
So
I think you're right. Yeah. Yep. That was my thinking look. I was going through the schedule in my head.
They played 2 Big Ten teams this year. It's been a little bit since they played 2 Big Ten teams.
That's true. Yeah, because for a while
2018, they did. It was the last time I think they did. 2018, I think. Could be wrong on that.
Zachary Lane says, BD, sorry if this has been asked before, but what's going on with Kristofic? I thought he'd be a potential starter coming into the season. What's the issue?
I think part of it is he's just a little light still. They'd like to get a little bit more punch from him. I think the other part of it is Andrew has to be more assertive. He has to be more forceful. And I think they want that out of him. Now, I think part of that is developed. I think part of that is coached into him. He's a kid that had played tackle his whole career. He's a right tackle in high school. He's a tackle at Notre Dame. And you move him to guard, it's a little bit of a different animal. Stuff comes at you faster. Now, I think he's a guy that's worth pushing, but we got to see if Notre Dame's willing to do it or not. My concern is that there's some guys that they're just kind of, okay, we got these really good freshmen, whatever, not going to deal with these guys anymore. I don't like that, but that is something I'm concerned about based on some things that I'm hearing.
Paul Benoit says, hey, guys, totally off talk, but I've been waiting for this to come out for weeks, and it's never really come up. He has the question in kind of the next comment here. He said, why not recruit the in-state kid, Caden Curry? He's an in-state kid who seems as an outsider to make sense. What are your thoughts?
I'm curious if his name's Paul Benoit, because I think he spells that like Chris Benoit, correct? But I'm curious about that. Let us know which way you pronounce that, Paul, because we try to get those right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Honestly,
he's a defensive tackle. I don't know if you've looked at his film or not.
He's a defensive tackle that weighs 250 pounds. That's my concern. Now, I think he probably fits a little better in Marcus Freeman's defense than he did in Clark Lee's. The problem in Clark Lee's defense is, where does he play? I don't think he's a defensive end in a 4-down defense. I don't. I think he's a kid that you need to grow into a 3 technique. He could play defensive end in more of a 5 technique type of thing, which is what Marcus Freeman's going to have more of. And Notre Dame did try to get in on him when Marcus Freeman was hired, but number one, some of the ends they got, they just like better. I mean, and they like Tyson Ford. I mean, Caden Curry is a 6'5", 250-pound, 6'4", 250-pound D tackle that's in an end's body.
Yeah.
Tyson Ford is a 6'6", 260-pound end who maybe could go inside.
Right.
And then Aiden Gabera has a higher ceiling. So, I mean, I just think they found guys that they like better. They were never super high on him because I don't think he necessarily fit Clark Lea's defense. And I don't know if there was ever really a strong mutual interest between either side of that conversation. So it's a little interesting situation. And that's one at the beginning I was like, why aren't they recruiting this kid? Mm-hmm. But that's why you got to let things play out. Because honestly, the three kids they have at defensive end have higher ceilings than what Caden Curry has, in my opinion.
And that makes sense.
Right. I mean, I know he's ranked higher, right? Yeah. Recruiting rank, but I don't care about that, right? And I don't think he is a nose tackle. And that's why I don't think he is like he can't do, in my opinion, what Donovan Heinisch can do. That's my issue.
Lauren has a really good question, which I know we could go a long time on, but she says, how big of a problem do you think schools actively but not openly recruiting top players from other schools will be with the new transfer rule?
It's going to be a huge problem. Now, when we talk about top players, we're not talking about like I'm worried that another team is going to call
Ohio State is going to
convince Justin Fields to leave Ohio State to go to Kentucky.
Right.
Not worried about that. What I am concerned about and what is going to happen is Kentucky does a great job recruiting this 3-star kid that not a single big-time program recruited. They coach the kid up, comes out as a freshman or sophomore, blows up, and he transfers to Alabama. That's what's going to happen. That was always what was going to happen. I said this before the rule got passed. Why do you think programs like Michigan and Notre Dame and Ohio State and Clemson and Oklahoma and Alabama were all for this rule? Because they know. They see it in college basketball. All these schools producing at these lower level schools, these non-power programs are producing these kids, and these basketball players. Oh, okay, well, that kid's dropping 20 in the back. Come play for Michigan State. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
That's going to happen in football. That was always the plan. All these people that think this is going to create parity, you're believing something that is just not true, and it was never the intention. What's not going to happen is Bama losing starters to Kentucky. What will happen is Kentucky and Vanderbilt losing starters.
Well, and I feel like the MAC is now the minor leagues for
100%.
the Big Ten. You know what I mean? Like that's
100%.
That's how I feel that this transfer rule and what it's done. Because all
Tulsa
these
just lost both of their starting. Tulsa had one of the best defenses in the group of 6 last year, right? One of the best. They lost Zaven Cause, the NFL, and now both of their starting corners are going to be starting in Missouri next year. Both of them. So it wasn't just a Caleb Evans. It was the other kid too.
Yeah.
They both are at Missouri now. And they've followed their position coach.
Right.
So that's the other thing.
And I'm
going to go. It's what happens. You step in basketball all the time. Hey, let's go hire this position coach from Tulsa and convince him to bring his 2 stud corners with him.
Mm-hmm.
You know that's going to happen. So, and it was always the plan, Lauren. I mean, they spin it as like player freedom. Coaches don't care about player freedom. They care about what can we do
to make ourselves better.
To make ourselves better, to give us another sort of a revenue stream, so to speak, of top players.
What it is.
This was never meant to help create parity. It's not going to create parity. You know, schools like Notre Dame will occasionally lose a Jordan Johnson, but Chase Claypool's not leaving after 2018 to go start somewhere else because he's already started at Notre Dame.
Right.
You'll occasionally have that happen if a kid's like, I'm not getting touches and this team doesn't
it'll be for
enough.
Different.
But it's going to be rare. What you're going to start seeing a lot more of now is kids from smaller schools break out and transfer to big schools. And they're just going to say, well, we need a running back. We'll take that kid.
Yes,
you know, we need this
exactly
kid.
Right.
You know, we're Notre Dame. We need a guard. We're going to take Marshall's All-American guard.
Yeah.
That's how it's going to be. It's going to happen. And it's impossible to police. Because what are you going to do? Like phone records for every kid associated with every player? You know, because it's not like Nick Saban calling up the kid saying, "Hey, look, when we want you." No, it's them talking to some high school coach who's going to talk to some other high school coach who's going to let the mom know that, hey, if he looks at if he was interested in Alabama, they'd probably listen. Just saying.
Exactly. It'll all be behind.
Exactly.
I mean, so that's what you call actively recruiting.
Right.
Yes, there will be inroads to get in touch with these kids.
And she says it the right way. It's actively but not openly, you know, and that's exactly how it's going to be. 100% how it's going to be.
Searcher Green, what is the time frame for the transfer portal? It isn't open all year around, is it?
It's open all year round. A kid can enter the transfer portal anytime. What the deadlines are, and I think this year it's July 1st or June 1st. There's deadlines where if you don't enter it by this time, you're not eligible for that upcoming season.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So we were unsure of how that was going to work. Remember we talked about this a while ago, and I did some digging into this, and it looks like if you leave after that deadline, you can transfer, but you can't play right away. Is my understanding. Now, okay. I'm curious to see if this gets challenged or not. And because it's like, look, if I leave in fall camp, why do I have to sit out a year? You said it's player freedom, right? Yeah. Player freedom.
Right.
Well,
that's going to be real interesting because can a kid leave in the middle of the seson and then play like literally be a free agent deadline?
Doing some research is that can't happen.
Okay.
But if you're going to make the rule here, why not make the rule there? I mean, it's just you're opening up the floodgates. Just here's what we do. Let's just let kids leave whenever the heck they want. Let's turn them into employees, and if they're not playing well, you can fire them and go hire a new employee. I mean, that's the path these morons are pushing. All these, we're just looking out for the players, and they're going to be the same idiots. They're going to be like, well, we never saw this coming. It's because you're an idiot or you're dishonest, right? It's like saying like all these state legislatures are looking out for the players by passing legislation for NIL. No, they see a new revenue stream.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, if these kids at these colleges are starting to get some of that NCAA money, guess what? We're going to tax it. You think they're just going to, hey, good job making all that money, son. You can keep it all yourself. No, hey, great job making $50,000 next year. We want 50% of that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just whatever. Get me mad.
Mike Gardner says, I don't hear too much concerning Quinn Carroll or Hunter Spears. Any news on these two? Which scheme best covers O-line deficiencies, spread formation or 12 personnel?
You're going to get a difference of opinion on those last two. I personally think it's the spread. I personally think. As long as you have playmakers, because you can get the ball out quicker, you can create more spacing, things like that.
Yep.
Other people are going to. Notre Dame, I think, believes 12 personnel is the way to go. Extra blockers. I don't think that's the way to go because I think now you may get two closer blockers in, but by being in a heavier personnel grouping, you now have 8 guys in the box, 9 guys in the box.
I'm a personal proponent of the quicker the ball gets out and away from the offensive lineman, the better off you are.
Think about it. If you're in 12 personnel with 2 tight ends, if you're in a traditional 12 personnel set that Notre Dame uses, and occasionally they'll put a guy out in the slot, but if you're in a traditional 12 personnel group, you're going to have 9 players in the box. So you're going to have 2 tight ends, a back, and a quarterback plus the 5 linemen.
Right.
Well, okay, yeah, you may have 2 extra blockers, but now they have 2 extra defenders.
100%. Why would they not do that?
Right. I like spreading it and creating more space. I think that's the direction that most of college football is going. Mm-hmm. There's still some stubborn old school coaches that think that, going heavy personnel is the way to go. And for some schools, heavy personnel is the way to go because that's the kind of personnel. I mean, Wisconsin should never put in a spread offense.
Right.
That's not the personnel. It doesn't fit the personnel that you're going to be able to recruit to Wisconsin.
Right.
Notre Dame, I think, has more. I mean, Notre Dame should always be a team built around the offensive line, but I think spreading the field is going to help protect an experienced offensive line better than going big personnel.
Tony says, don't ever change, Brian. Sometimes tough criticism is well-deserved.
And it's going to always be there. I'm simply trying to provide hey, look, I have this opinion. I've stated my criticism, but I also think that we need to be able to say they're not complete morons at Notre Dame. They're going to make mistakes. There's 2 trains of thought that I hate that drive me nuts. The one that drives me the most nuts are the people that are like, no matter what they do, they're always right. And because you don't coach at Notre Dame, you don't have the right to the opinion. Right. I can't stand people like that. Those are usually the people putting down votes on, YouTube things. And those are the people that are on message boards and like, I know they went 4-8, but shut up, go away. Let the grownups talk. Okay. I think it's good to say, hey, look, but I also think the other one is like, because they haven't won a championship, they're stupid and they don't know what they're doing. Right. What I like about what we have going on here is we have a lot of people that are willing to engage in both sides of this conversation. Say, look, they haven't won a title. So until they win a title, they're not above reproach. They're going to make mistakes. Here's some examples. Brian Van Gorder, right? And so we need to be able to have those conversations, but then also say, but they're not doing this just because they hate Notre Dame fans and they don't want to win, right? Like they're not saying, hey, let's get Kane Madden and do this because we really don't want to win this year. They may be wrong, but they think it's going to work. So let's talk about why they might be doing this. And then if it doesn't work, we can criticize them for it. But at least we've explained, here's why they did it. And that's how I always want to be. And I think at times in the past, I've erred on the side of just presenting my criticism. And I'm never going to stop presenting my criticisms or my praises, because there's been times I've praised them when other people were critical.
Sure.
And so I'm always going to do that. But I think it's better for y'all and for the product that we're giving that we're also more willing to engage in. Okay, we've expressed our disagreement, but we can either complain for an hour about it, or we can say our frustration, but then also engage in a legitimate dialogue about, okay, why are they doing this?
Right.
And what could be the benefits if they're right and we're not? Because, they're not infallible and neither are we. I think I'm right enough to where I feel comfortable being able to give my opinion and stand by it. But I don't bat 1,000. Neither does Brian Kelly. So let's have these conversations about it. And then the proof is going to be in the pudding once we get to the fall. And in this instance, again, I hope they're right. Just like I think everybody out there hopes that I'm right about Jack Cohn.
Sure.
Because if I'm right about Jack Cohn and we're right about the receivers and all that, and you're right about Cam Hart, then this is going to be a fun year. But if they're wrong about Kane Madden and we're wrong about Jack Cohn and the receivers, this is going to be
a real interesting year. Yeah. Let's put it that way. Tyler says, Brian, patience is something I've never had. LOL. Give me all the recruits now.
I get it. Tyler would not have. Tyler, I'm curious how old you are. You would not have done well in recruiting under Lou Holtz's era, because Lou Samoji has explained this to me. Lou told me that the majority of Notre Dame's class would actually be filled from December to signing day in February. Oh. Because they'd bring all these kids in for the banquet.
2 months.
They'd bring kids in for games, but it was more about the banquet. I mean, kids didn't decide until late.
Sure.
And so, a lot of these kids went to signing day, and you didn't really start seeing classes fill up as juniors until Mac Brown started doing it at Texas. That's when it really got into it. But so from December, at the end of the season, from the banquet to signing day was just a mad scramble for recruiting. And boy, could you imagine, right now, Notre Dame have 3 commits. I mean, what would all of these recruiting services talk about?
Yeah, right.
It's crazy. Yeah, it was wild. It was wild. I love listening to Lou's stories about you'd have these 15 5-star type of kids at these banquets in December. Those are that was the big recruiting weekend for Notre Dame under Lou Holtz. It's wild. Great stories.
Brian Meadows says, great show. I listen every day. I follow Blake Fisher's recruitment. He's a rare and special talent. I haven't seen a kid like that in years. Thanks,
and
Brian.
I've had people that Ryan Harris did in our show. Everyone that I've ever talked to that's actually been into Notre Dame practice that knows anything about offensive line says that kid's different. Not personally, they don't know him. I'm not talking about his character. They don't know him. I'm talking about as a football player. They said, you're not supposed to be able to do that when you're to earlier. Who was it that said a 330-pound kid's not supposed to move like that?
Right. Exactly. Run 21 miles an hour was that video that was on Twitter.
But it's also, he's also a really smart offensive lineman too. That's the other thing. Is there a plane about to crash outside of your building?
It's a very large lawnmower.
Okay.
That just kind of took me by surprise too.
Yeah.
Audrey says, do you think we will see a 2013 situation with the offensive line where you have moving parts throughout the season until they have solidified a starting 5?
I think that was 2014, I believe. 2013, the line was pretty set. You had Zach Martin at left tackle, Chris Watt at left guard. You had Nick Martin at center, and Christian Lombard started somewhere when he was healthy. 2014 is when you had lost Zach, you had lost Chris Watt, and Nick Martin was out during the spring. I think Matt Haggerty was out during the spring. Christian Lombard was out for the spring, and it was a mess. And then they moved Nick Martin from center to guard during the season because remember he broke his hand, and they moved Matt Haggerty to center, and it was just a hot mess. But once they figured it out in the late in the year, they actually were the rest of the team stunk in the last 5 games of the year, but the offensive line actually started playing better. I mean, they rushed for 100 yards. Torian Folston had 100 yards against Louisville that year, even though they lost the game. There's only 2 running backs, I believe, that year that rushed 3 running backs that whole year that rushed for 100 yards against Louisville. It was Dalvin Cook, Duke Johnson, and Torian Folston. That was it. So that was back when Louisville played really good defense, if you remember. So they were playing really well at the end of the year. It's just the rest of the team was hot garbage down the stretch.
Audrey has another comment, says, P.S. Vincenzo, when are you going to convince Brian to take over the football program at Riley and bring the pride back to the South Side? I volunteer for line and strength and conditioning help. Like I said, if I ever become an AD, it's going to be my first phone call. I know how it's going to go, but it's still going to be my first phone call. So
yes,
that's just the way it
afford
is.
Me. Can't afford me.
That's probably true. Let's see here. Okay, here we go. Anthony says, what happens if we miss on Pope, Bellamy, and Xavier?
It would be bad, but it's not going to happen.
I love that response.
They're not canceling visits because they hope they can get somebody.
Right,
they feel
exactly.
pretty good.
You don't cancel visits if you're not sure.
Now, if that happens, it's going to be like, wow, that was a dumb move. But
let me ask you a
staff this savvy. Let's just say this: a staff this savvy isn't making that kind of mistake, in my opinion.
Is there a total number of official visits that a school can give out to kids?
Yeah, it's like 75 or something. I mean,
it's a big
they're not
number.
Close to getting to that.
Okay.
No, it's a big number.
Okay.
I don't know if Notre Dame has ever maxed out its full official visits.
Gotcha. Okay. I was just curious as to that would
there is a number, but yeah, they're not canceling these as cost cutting moves.
Right.
It's like where we're at.
We're not going to waste our time. We don't want to waste your time. It just is what it is. I actually respect the heck out of them for doing it. Yeah.
Because these kids get 5 visits. That's it.
Exactly.
And if you bring in Sebastian Cheeks, because, let's say you feel you're going to get Jalen Sneed, but he hasn't gone public or whatever, and you're not going to take, that's disrespectful to the kid.
I completely agree.
The same thing with Nakai Martinez, same thing with Cade. If you're not going to take a kid because you're somewhere else,
right,
and you don't tell the kid that and you still bring him in, just in case. And
I don't like that either. I really don't.
So I'm good with now. If they just did it because they think they're going to get a guy, but the kid hasn't actually committed or whatever else, I'm like, But no, I think the other part of it is too is they're okay with just one safety in this class. They want 2, right, and they want the first and third of those guys on that list. The better orders, the third and the first. But they're okay with just one because, they're going to sign 7. In my opinion, they're going to finish with 7 corners in 2 years because I think they're going to get 2 more corners in this class.
Right.
Not all those guys are playing corner. And so that's also part of – I really think this staff is trying to emphasize bringing in a lot of bigger corners because they want more coverage ability across the board in the secondary. So you turn a Philip Riley into a safety, not because he can't play corner, but because he can play safety at a high level and can give you coverage skills that you don't want. I think it's a really smart strategy. It's like the old school strategy of taking linebackers and turning them into defensive ends and taking safeties and turning them into linebackers. You take a bunch of corners and you convert them to safety just to get your best athletes on the field. I think that's a great strategy.
Sure.
It really is.
Yeah,
that's
I'm okay
how you
with
get
that.
athletic.
Yep.
That's one thing Lou Holtz did a lot of, right? Chris Zorich came to Notre Dame as a freaking linebacker.
Yeah, made him into
a nose.
What I mean?
Yeah. So, and that's how you get athletic. You get these running backs turn them into linebackers. They're going to be athletic. I think it's a smart strategy, and that's what it appears that they're doing because they're focusing on so many corners. They're not focusing on a lot of safeties, and you're like, yeah, but a lot of these corners could be pretty good safeties too.
Yeah, for sure. Irish Kev 304 says, hands down, best informative show for Notre Dame football. Great job, guys.
I've never seen him before.
I haven't either. So, yeah, thanks for joining us, Irish Kev. I'm getting kicked out because school is rolling. And the lawnmower is very annoying, too. So
sounds good.
I don't want to mess
finish up here quick, Vince, but thanks for being on the show with us.
I will
late to the show, early to leave. I tell you what, man.
Tell
you what. All right, man.
I just holding on to
We're going to keep rolling. We have a few more questions here, so we still got some Notre Dame football we're going to get through. But Vince, appreciate you being on the show with us today. So let's kind of get through this. Liam Gaming, is it fair to say we should be behind in player development? We should be behind a development player scenario spring 2020 and the craziest fall ever. We were lucky to have 5 multi-year starts. Are other teams behind on development as well? I don't think you can use that excuse anymore, Liam. And it's a very fair question, but I just don't buy that excuse anymore because you have had a full season now. You have had a full uninterrupted off season now. So I think the whole development thing could have been understandable for 2020. So I don't blame them for not having Cam Hart ready to play last year because he needed that spring so desperately and didn't get it. But we're past that now. And the other part to your point is almost everybody missed out on. There were some teams that started super early and actually didn't miss that much. But for the most part, everybody else missed out on time. So I think we're past the point now where people need to be using that that excuse. And I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying, like, for Notre Dame to do that. Richard Robinson says, great job as always. I saw Rice play at IMG. Incredibly talented player. Is there a reason he does not have interest in Notre Dame with successful Notre Dame players? You would think he would at least visit. Are you talking about Zach Rice? Because Zach Rice, I believe, is visiting Notre Dame, unless that's been canceled since the show started. But I think there's just better places that I think he views as better fit. Matt D says, like, share, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Absolutely appreciate all y'all doing that. Before you leave, please hit the like button and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit the notifications bell so you always have we always have you there. We always know that you're always going to know when we have shows coming out. If you're listening via podcast, would really appreciate a 5-star review. Appreciate that very much. Mike Robbins says, isn't it possible that Kelly made the comment to Hinsman about Patterson just because Patterson is more recognizable and successful than Corral so far? Certainly possible, but you could make the counter argument that, you'd want to sell that you don't have a great player there because it's not a guarantee that Jarrett Patterson is going to leave after this year, although we think we can. But I certainly think it's possible, Mike, and that's why we're not – and it wasn't Coach Kelly, it was Tommy Reese that made that conversation. That's why I'm not, like, jumping off and going crazy about these comments because – let's let it play out first. Let's see, and we offered at the beginning that I'm also hearing from other people that Patterson's still going to play guard. I want to let it play out first before we have too strong of a reaction to it because, like you said, there could be other reasons. Like, look, Notre Dame has said things to kids in the past, and you're like, yeah, that's an exaggeration. Or he's not telling them. He's being honest because they're saying, hey, we think you can be the next this kid, but they're not telling the kid about the really stud redshirt freshman they got coming up that they really love. And that's, it's kind of being honest. So it is what it is. Old Grim is home from golf. I know the concerns are real, but I want some time to see what the line really looks like. And I think that's a very fair thing for us all to have. Let's see kind of how it pans out, So let's get to some more questions here. Audrey says, Brian, why do you think great players like Denson and Light have a hard time translating their talent into coaching? I don't think it's, obviously all great players don't have that problem. There's some former great players that are good coaches. I think Light was a good coach. I think Light was a pretty darn good cornerbacks coach. Notre Dame had one of the best corner tandems in the country in 2018. They were pretty good at corner in 2019, and they were pretty good at corner in 2017. I think his issue was more about recruiting. I think Denson's issues were a lot deeper than that for me. So, I look at it and I say, listen, I think it's a situation where with them, they weren't great recruiters because recruiting is a grind. It isn't just, hey, I walk in the room and I'm Todd Light and I'm a former All-American and all that. That's what he did and that's worked for him, but it's not just that. It's also constant calls, constant texts, calling parents, calling coaches, and not every coach wants to do that. And I think especially someone like Todd Light, who is so intelligent and cultured and has been so successful in business before coaching, and then all of a sudden you're just a position coach who's got to work, 120 hours a week, and a lot of that's recruiting. That can be a thing where, like, yeah, my heart's not in it. And I think that's why a big reason you saw Coach Light completely get out of coaching and not just go somewhere else. It's because of that right there. And if you didn't kind of come up in the business, it can be a challenge to get to that type of just that doggedness that requires some recruiting. And that was his issue with Coach Denson, is he just didn't want to put in the work in recruiting. He just flat out did not put in the work, had no desire. I think Coach Light put in work. There was another level needed. I don't think Autry Denson just put in work. He just it just seemed no interest in it. I'd call him, other people would reach out to him in the recruiting business. We used to have these kind of conversations, and we'd reach out to him. We'd say, hey, coach, this kid, here's the situation. Like, yeah, I got it. It's all God's will. And then just never follow up. And it's like, we're trying to help you as best we can, like we do with every other coach, and you're doing nothing with it. I just think he had really no interest in that regards. And then you look at, so Tommy Reese is still has time to prove, but was he a great player? I'm solid. Again, it's not just that you're a great player. It's just players in general. Whether you're a great player or not, it's you're going to have these issues. And so I think that to me is more of an issue. Get some more questions here. Let's get down. A lot of conversation going here. I really like it. Pierre says, your thoughts on Notre Dame O-line versus the Florida State D-line. Is it too soon? No, it's not too. It's too soon from the standpoint of, we really don't know what even the Notre Dame offensive line is going to look like. I don't think it's too soon to say, hey, look, let's start thinking about what the matchups could look like. And when I look at Florida State, they got a transfer from Georgia on the defensive end, who I think is a pretty good player. I think he could maybe present some issues with the Notre Dame tackles. But the thing that I like about that matchup for Notre Dame is he's not necessarily a real big, long guy, and Notre Dame's going to have really big, long tackles. I mean, this is the biggest tackle tandem Notre Dame's going to have really since 2015 when you had McGlinchey at right tackle and Ronnie Stanley at left tackle. I mean, this is going to be a tall, long group. It's even bigger than the McGlinchey Alex Bars group or duo in 2016, just because I think Josh Lugg's longer than Alex Bars. Not taller. He is taller, actually, but he's longer. And then Ronnie had really long arms. So I think it's going to be the longest group. I think the interesting matchup is going to be inside. Notre Dame should be able to control that matchup because Florida State lost a lot from its defensive line. I mean, Josh Kando's gone. Marvin Wilson's gone. I'm not sure about Darden. I'm not sure if Corey Darden's back or not yet. They got that real big nose tackle. I believe he's also back. So that's the interesting matchup for me. I think they'll be fine at tackle. The area where I'm hoping that they don't struggle with. I hope that they don't struggle inside because that could really blow up a lot of things and really impact it in a big way. All right, Ronald, just thought I would let you know. Finally got started. Had to find the right picks to get it straight in my head. Think you will like the results. Keep rocking, guys. So Ronald is making me drawing a car of my favorite car that I'm gonna hang up when we're gonna read. I'm gonna redesign this whole backdrop here this summer at some point in time. My sister bought me a fat head of Notre Dame Stadium, which I'm gonna eventually get set up here, and we got some other things we're gonna do to try to create a little bit more enticing background, a little bit a cooler background than what now is just kind of playing with the Sports Illustrated thing. So, and Ronald's going to give me one of those things. So I really appreciate that. Very, very much looking forward to that. Let's get back up. There's some more questions so we can get this going. Jeff Fluke says, any idea why there's so many skeptics in the Notre Dame community? Previous recruiting losses, it's a different staff. Reese is underrated as a recruiter, in my opinion. And I get all that, Jeff, but at the same time, what's the expectation, Notre Dame, right? The expectation is a national championship. And the reality is for all the wonderful things Brian Kelly's done, and he has done a lot of them, not only has Notre Dame not won a title, they haven't even been competitive, really, in those instances. I mean, they battled on one side of the ball in 2018, but the game was never competitive in the second half. I mean, it was over by halftime. The Clemson game, the Alabama game, both times, it was over by halftime. And you're Notre Dame. So, yeah, when that's happening to you, I think a healthy level of skepticism is needed. Otherwise, there's no account. And I think we see this a little bit. There's no accountability. Hey, look, we're good. If we're 10-2 and the fan base is happy, then where's the motivation to say, hey, we better get it to the next level or we're going to be out of here? I think when you're Notre Dame, you can praise Brian Kelly for a great job getting Notre Dame to this level. And he's done a great job getting Notre Dame to this level. But the next step is needed. It's kind of like the criticism I've had of him for years in recruiting. Well, now look at it, Jeff. He's recruiting, and I just got a text that Corey Durden transferred to NC State, so that's another loss they have. So that again, that's another loss for Florida State. But back to Jeff's question, when I look at it and I say he's doing good things now, he's making changes, and look what's happening. It's the results are there, and that's kind of been my issue. Is like, when you've done these things that I'm advocating for you to do, that it's gone well for you. Your best offense was the year that you spread it around, and they actually ran some RPOs in 2015. You can go back and watch the Boston College game, and there was things that Deshaun Kaiser was doing with some RPO type things, and it's been effective for you. And so those are the things. It's not that they're skeptics, but Jeff, I think it's fair that Notre Dame fans should hold Notre Dame to a championship standard. What I think is silly and unfair is when people will look at, like last year and say, failure. No, last year was not a failure. Did they reach the ultimate goal? No. Did they live up to the Notre Dame standard of championships? No. But here's the deal. Frank Leahy was a phenomenal coach. Newt Rockne was a phenomenal coach. They had more years where they didn't win a title than the years they won titles. You're not going to win it every year. And so you have to look at it and say, okay, but are they continuing to move in the right direction? 2020 was a year of moving in the right direction. In some areas it was small, in some areas it was a step back, but in other areas it was a step forward. And so they were able to win when the circumstances weren't ideal. That's a sign of a healthy program. Are there things they should have done different? Yeah. Are there things I was critical of them for? Yeah. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's good to be having a criticism of where 11-2 and 10-2 in back-to-back years, and there's some people that are not happy. I think that's okay, as long as that unhappiness doesn't become fire Brian Kelly, he stinks and he's no good. Okay, well, that's okay. That's not a rational conversation, and it's just as irrational as saying, well, everything is wonderful because he's not Charlie Weiss or not Ty Willingham. I think both of those sides are faulty, and I think where we should all be as Notre Dame fans is to enjoy the success they've had. Now, 43-8 in 4 years is pretty good, but then also we should all be willing to say it's been fun, it's been good, but more is needed, more is required, and more is there to be had. You know, if Notre Dame had reached its peak as a program, I'd be the first one sitting here saying we need to change our expectations. The game has changed, recruiting has changed. This is as good as it's going to get for Notre Dame. I'd be honest with you about that, but I don't believe that's true. I don't think they're doing everything possible, and I think it's okay to say that. It's just it can't become an irrational criticism. And I think when this particular day, the topic is such of the offensive line, because I do think there's a lot of legitimate fear about Jeff Quinn not being up to the standard that you need. When you look at the guy that Brian Kelly chose him over, Joe Elliott, that's the guy that Chip Long wanted. That's the guy that I was told by people before the hire was made that the players wanted. And you look at him and you say, well, he's the offensive line coach for the Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year. And instead, you have Jeff Quinn, because the thing is that those people realize is Notre Dame can't afford to take a step back in the offensive line. They have to be great there. And so there's a healthy concern. Now, we need to have a rational, healthy concern about it, but and not just complain about no matter what. Like, there's a certain segment of the fan base, and they all tend to hang out at one site that I don't mind being critical of. And it doesn't matter what Brian Kelly does. He could win a national championship, and they're not going to be happy because they just don't like Brian Kelly. And I think that's petty and childish, and that's not what we're going to do here. But I also don't think that we're never going to be the site that's just, you know, Brian Kelly, everything he does is right, and everything he does is wonderful, and everything he does is brilliant. And yeah, they went 10-2 and got smacked in the final two games and weren't competitive against the best teams on the schedule. But hey, he's not Ty Willingham. That's not going to be us. So I do think a healthy skepticism is needed to be there until he wins a title. And then if he wins a title and they're 9-3 the next 3 years, okay, that ain't good enough. You know what I'm saying? And I think that makes for fun debate. If we're all just like, well, whatever the coaches say is best, then what are we talking about for the next 2 months? Right? And that's no fun. You know, I mean, that I don't enjoy that at all. And I don't think really anybody is above criticism or reproach for all types of different things. Brandon says, I think Notre Dame only lands Bradshaw now if they somehow miss on Merriweather or Williams, seeming more and more like Anderson is a lock to Notre Dame. I don't think Anderson being a lock to Notre Dame means that they look, Anderson being a lock to Notre Dame has nothing to do with Xavier Bradshaw. It's just about whether or not they want him. And I mean, I tend to agree with you. Here's the deal. If they want Xavier Bradshaw, they can get Xavier Bradshaw. If they choose not to get him, that's on them. You know, there you go. Benjamin Weiss says, hey, my brother Gabe. Gabe, we were very familiar with him. Turned me on your show, but I've never been able to watch it live due to work. Sorry for all the bad questions. Time for some hard hitters. Okay, so here we go. Here's his first couple hard-hitting questions. Would you rather fight 50 chicken-sized Jerome Bettis or one horse-sized Lou Holtz? I am not messing with a horse that's the size of Lou Holtz. No, with the heart of Lou Holtz, that's not happening. All right. Omar also says, it's weird that I'm getting excited when Notre Dame cancels visits at positions of major targets we just had on campus. It's not weird at all. It's a sign of a healthy program. This is stuff Alabama does. This is stuff Clemson does. This is stuff Ohio State does. This is a good thing. There's no question. It's definitely a good thing. All right. Ronald's response was crazy. I'd rather fight 50 chickens. Holtz is crazy. Absolutely. Absolutely. Benjamin Weiss, and this is a good question. Okay, seriously, what does coach mean, that'd be me, by a volume catcher, and what makes a volume catcher? Because unlike a running back, you have to get open and get the ball. It takes skill to get the ball, unlike running back. So here's what I mean by a volume catcher, okay? And I believe you're referring to my comments about C.J. Williams. So to me, like with anything, there's different types of running backs. There's some running backs are, if you get them 20, 25 carries and they're averaging 4.8 yards a carry, you're getting exactly what you want out of them because they're hammers. Then there's running backs, he may only carry the ball 6 or 7 times, like how the role Dexter Williams had, but he's going to be a 7, 8, yard per carry guy. Chris Tyree maybe could be that way. Running backs are the same way, right? So Braden Lindsey can be an impact player, but Braden Lindsey's not going to be an impact player that helps you win a championship by catching 80 balls. That's just not his game. His game is more catch 40, average 20 plus yards a catch, run maybe 10 reverses and jet sweeps and things like that, average, maybe 10 to 15 yards there. And all of a sudden, you're a dynamic player. So like Rocket Ismail at Notre Dame was the most impactful player I've ever seen in my life. But if you look at his numbers, he never was a volume producer, right? He just didn't get the touches to be a volume producer. You look at Will Fuller, he was a little bit of both. He was a volume plus a big play guy. And then you look at a guy like Miles Boykin, who's more just volume. He wasn't a guy who was going to have a bunch of games with 3 catches of 120 yards. He had some. LSU, he was kind of like that. But more often than not, he was more like 8 for, 105, things like that. And so, Braden Lindsey has that kind of – he can do damage with 3 touches. He can change the game with 3 touches. If CJ Williams only touches the ball 3 times, it's going to be like 3 touches for like 40 yards, and he did okay, but he just didn't really impact the game. Whereas what you're going to see is like, let's say you have Xavier Bradshaw and CJ Williams on the same receiving corps, right? Well, I look at a guy like CJ Williams and I'm saying that's more of a Miles Boykin type of guy. That's more of a Juju Smith-Schuster type of guy. That's more of a DeAndre Hopkins kind of guy, where DeAndre Hopkins isn't doing the things that Tyreek Hill does for Kansas City. Doesn't mean he's better or worse. I think he's better, but he's not a guy that's going to have a bunch of 5 catch for 130-yard games. It's going to be more 8, 9, 10 catches. Michael Thomas is a volume pass catcher, right? This is not a criticism. It just means their game is more about winning those one-on-ones, moving the chains, being good in the red zone. If it's 3rd and 4, using his size to out-leverage, out-muscle somebody to get him the ball, right? And then, so he may have like 8 catches for like 95 yards or 8 catches for 100 yards, or sometimes it may be like 8 catches for 75 yards because, 4 of his catches were like 5 to 7 yards each, but they were on 3rd and 2, 3rd and 4, plays like that, right? Where Braden Lindsey is not going to have an 8 catch for 78-yard game. And if he does, then he didn't really impact the game, most likely. What with him or Xavier Bradshaw, he may only touch the ball 4 or 5 times, but it's for 120 yards, 3 catches and 1 jets, 1 reverse for 40 yards or something like that, right? So it's the big play guys, it's the volume guys, and then there are some guys, and I think Tobias Merriweather can be that, can do a little bit of everything. It's that big guy that can stretch the field. I think Chase Claypool was this way. Chase could make a play, could dominate the game with 3 or 4 touches as a senior, but he also was a guy that if you needed him to, could go make 9 or 10 catches. And so I think Tobias Merriweather is that way. CJ Williams is, to me, based on what we see now, is never going to be a guy that's just going to take the top off the defense all the time. He's going to be more of like a Miles Boykin type. He's going to be more of a Michael Floyd is the best example at Notre Dame under Brian Kelly. Now, Michael Floyd is a freshman and sophomore at Notre Dame, was more of a big play guy. But Brian Kelly turned him, this isn't a criticism, I should say it differently, not Brian Kelly turned him into, but in Brian Kelly's offense, he was more of a volume pass catcher. So if you look at his numbers in 2011, I'm going to pull them up here. He had 100 catches for 1,147 yards. Okay. Then you look at 2015, Will Fuller had 12,258 yards. He did that on 62 catches. So 38 fewer catches, but over 100 more yards. Michael Floyd averaged 11.5 yards per catch. Will Fuller averaged 20.3 yards per catch. I think they were both great players. They both impacted the game in big ways. They just did it in completely different types of ways. And so, Benjamin, when I'm explaining what a volume pass catcher is, it's it's a Michael Floyd type in 2011. It's a Miles Boykin type of player. And I love those guys. What I don't want at Notre Dame, and my fear with how they're building the receiving core, is that they're recruiting way too many guys like that. And there's not enough balls to go around. But now it's like teams are just going to come down and play tight because they're not afraid of you stretching the defense. And that's why I say, give me a CJ Williams, give me a Tobias Merriweather, or CJ Williams or Nicholas Anderson. Give me a Tobias Merriweather, but also give me Xavier Bradshaw. Give me the versatility of weapons. That's what the key is. And I think that's why I like CJ Williams. You say, well, he's not a burner. No. He's not a guy that's going to stretch the defense. Well, agree, but that's not what you're recruiting him to do. You're recruiting him to be a Juju Smith-Schuster type. You're recruiting him to be, Michael Floyd in 2011, not 100 catches, but you get what I'm saying, a Miles Boykin type. Whereas Tobias Merriweather, you're more recruiting him to be more of a T. Higgins, more of a Justin Ross, more of a, Chase Claypool, more of even a Will Fuller-ish type of guy. Not, he won't use just the raw speed, but, being 6'4", Mike Evans type. So I hope that answers your question. Michael Hughes says, is there a reason Patterson isn't an OT? Really like Fish, that Fisher showed up as ready to play as he is. I have a hard time believing Lugg is better than Patterson, but they may not think Lugg can hold up inside. It's not so much that. I think, number one, we don't know that he's not better, that he's better than Lugg as a tackle, because we've never seen Jarrett play tackle in college. I think the thing is about, it's not so much about, okay, he's your best here, so play him there. He's best there, so play him there. It's more about, what is our best five combination? And now the best five combination may not be your five most talented linemen. If you have, five guys that are pure guards, you're not going to have a very good offensive line. It's your best five, but it's not going to be a very good offensive line. You're going to play three of those guys, and then you're going to play two guys who are your best tackles. And so that's kind of where it's at. I think with Patterson, it's more about a tackle was originally where they were going to move him, but Blake Fisher stepped up and they felt good about it. So then, guard, now center potentially could be the move. But I think Josh Lugg, if you go back and watch him in 2019 when Robert Hainsey got hurt, I think Josh Lugg held up. I mean, didn't he just hold up? I thought he played well at that position. So I think he's going to be fine as long as he's healthy. That's the big question with Josh, is he's got to be healthy. Corey D, why is Notre Dame only recruiting 6'4" receivers? 2015 was Notre Dame's most explosive year at receiver under Kelly, and they had smaller receivers who are fast. Doesn't Kelly understand this? No, I don't think he does understand it, because I think he wants to have big boy football. I don't think the problem is 6'4" guys. I mean, if you're recruiting two Tobias Merriweathers, I'm going to be a lot happier than if you recruit one Tobias Merriweather and one Nicholas Anderson, because you have two dynamic players. I think when you look at LSU in 2019, they had two 6'4" guys in the starting lineup, and a Jamar Chase who's like 6'1.5", and he actually played like the biggest guy and how he plays. I think the problem isn't the 6'4" guys, it's the lack of diversity in the skill sets that those players have. That's my bigger issue. If you get 6'4" guys and one guy's a stretch the field vertical guy, and one guy's a big physical work the middle of the field guy, and the other guy's a smooth route runner that can do different things, then start 3 6'4" guys. Problem is that's not what Notre Dame is really doing. They're recruiting a lot more guys that are that are like Nick Anderson, that are like even a Deion Colsey, that are like Miles Boykin, that are like Javon McKinley, that are like Ben Skoranek, and they're not recruiting enough guys that are like Avery Davis. They're not recruiting enough guys that are like Will Fuller or like Amir Carlisle or like Chris Brown. That's my issue. But I also don't think you need look, there were some flaws with the 2015 receiving core. You look at when they played Clemson. Clemson was able to somewhat negate the receivers for half the game, and then they finally got going in the second half. But then you look at Temple had really good corners that year. They were kind of beat the smaller receivers up. They weren't able to kind of get it open as much. Will Fuller made plays at the end, but until then, Notre Dame was struggling. You look at the Ohio game. Fuller made one big play when the game was kind of already out of reach, and it makes a guy miss, goes for 80 yards. Ohio State had physical, fast corners that could run with those guys, and what Notre Dame didn't have on that team, didn't utilize, because Miles Boykin wasn't necessarily ready to do that. And I think St. Brown had been hurt already by that point in time. But what you did have is, hey, look, these guys can run with our fast guys. We don't have a big guy that we can throw it up to, that we can take advantage of. And then when you had the big guys, you went into these situations and you were in games where, Clemson in 2018 had big enough corners to hang with your big guys. You didn't have that complementary skill set of dynamic player that you could then turn to. Because you say, well, Chris Fink was small. I don't care about being small. Chris Fink wasn't a guy that you're going to throw a screen to and help him go make a play. He was just like the two big guys in that all the best work he did was prior to the catch. After the catch, Chris Fink's not doing damage against Clemson or Alabama. He may do it against Navy and teams like that and Duke, but he's not doing it against Alabama and Clemson, right? So you didn't have any diversity skill set. Everything you had was guys that did their work before and to the point of the catch. And that's the issue that I have. All right. Michael Hughes says, not so fast, coach. When the Colts drafted Luck, I never thought they'd play Brissett and even less Phillip Rivers. I'm not sure what you're referring to on that one. That's must have been from a while ago. So please respond. I'm not quite sure what that means. I don't remember bringing up the Colts. All righty. Brandon says Bradshaw will be the perfect complement to Merriweather and Williams and Anderson. I don't get what they're thinking. At least they're bringing Turner Bradshaw in for an official visit. I agree with you completely. I mean, I hope that what happens is he gets on campus. He's bigger maybe than they think. He's 5'11", legit 5'11", 6 foot. And they're like, yeah, we got to get this kid. I think his size is partly what their issue is. They're concerned about how big he is. But hopefully you're right. Hopefully that they do that and they get it going. All right, here we go. Paul Argentieri says, what's amazing to me that Notre Dame can't find the Tim Grunhard clones from tier offensive lineman, 6 foot 290 that will kick the crap out of everybody. That's a little bit of a different game, and I don't think that size player can be as successful now. It's a longer game. Defensive players are longer. You need to be a little bit longer. But I would argue that's what kind of Zeke Correll brings to the table, and hopefully they'll be able to do that. But, I mean, I always would err on the side of if all things are equal and one guy's longer than the other, I'm going to take the longer guy. If all things are equal. That's kind of where I'm coming from. MLA, he says Turner, Bradshaw, and that's what it is. Xavion Turner, Bradshaw. We're trying to go by the name that he goes by. Williams and Merriweather. That would make me very happy. As long as Bradshaw and Turner, Bradshaw and Merriweather in the class, I'm good with however else it turns out. And Justin Knox says that was Tim Ruddy. Let's see here. College football trade deadline. There we go. Jonathan, in the game of Notre Dame Monopoly, Brian Van Gorder was the go to jail card. I love that. And then Marcus Freeman is the get out of jail free card. I really like that. Patrick Bird, back to the O-line. The O-line is a little concerning till it shows up on the field. I'll hold judgment. I agree with that. I think that's a very fair way of looking at it. We can talk about the things that we're concerned about, the things we're excited about, and hopefully we did a good job of that in the show. I want to be able to present the things that could, if it goes well, this is why. If it doesn't go well, here's why. Now, wide receiver is a different story for me. Notre Dame needs quick and shifty game breakers. I think they're going to have that in 2021, Patrick. I think Avery Davis, Lawrence Keys, Braden Lindsey, I think they're going to have plenty of those. The concern is that they're not still recruiting those players. Those guys were all recruited by Chip Long, right? They just were. And one of those guys, Avery Davis, was recruited before this current staff even showed up. I mean, it was under the Mike. That's the guy Mike Sanford recruited to play quarterback. So for me, it's that they're kind of going away from that with the current recruiting in the last couple of years is my bigger concern. Patrick Bird, love the way Fisher uses his hands, advanced for a freshman. Agree. His instincts are really advanced as well. And this is what I said is, we focus so much on how big he is and how strong he is and the speed and all that, but I don't care if you got all those things. If you're not a smart football player, you can't play as a freshman, at least not effectively at a place like Notre Dame. I think that's kind of the thing for me is he's also a really smart, instinctive player too. He's not just big and talented. He is big and talented, but I think we're not talking about how quickly he picked everything up too. Even little things like there was a play in the spring where they ran a twist on him and he steps inside to handle the defensive end. And then he sees the looper and he just quickly comes off with great technique and picks up the looper. That's an instinctive intelligence thing. You've seen that on film. You've prepared for it. You're smart. You know what to do when you see it. And those are the things to me that are ultimately going to be his reasons for success. Yeah, he's got tremendous talent, but I've seen talented kids that are stink because they don't necessarily have, as young players, they eventually get it, but as freshmen, they don't. It's a thinking man's game too. I mean, football is a thinking man's game to be great. And the great players that are usually guys that are also really smart. And that's the thing I think that sets Blake apart is, yeah, he's got the physical tools, but he's a really smart football player too. And I think that's going to help him. Joseph Vaughn, if Notre Dame moves toward a 3-3-5 defense, does that affect the number of players recruited at each position? Yeah, absolutely, especially on the defensive line. You don't need 8 defensive tackles necessarily on your roster if you're a 3-3-5 team. You're going to want more Tyson Ford types at end. You're going to want more Jason Ademiolas as defensive tackles, which are maybe not the 300-pounders, the 295 guys, but the guys that are maybe 275 to 285, but can play 3 technique, but can also play on the edge. So you're going to see Riley Mills types, Jason Ademiola types, Anthony Lucas types, Tyson Ford types, as opposed to a bunch of Kurt Heinisches or Lewis Nixes or players like that. Now, that doesn't mean there's not value for that. You want those guys, but you don't need 8 of them. You know what I mean? It changes the numbers requirements that you need. Patrick says this class potential has me feeling like a kid at Christmas time. I get that. Patrick Bird says, what is more important, wide receiver top end speed or quick shiftiness? I think quick shiftiness is you want both, but I think the quick shiftiness is there because if you're just fast, we've seen track guys go try to play football and they're just not good football players because they don't have the ability to run routes. When you're playing against the best teams, you can't just run by people, and you've got to be able to do other things. And to me, the answer is Justin Knox says that the answer is both, but I would rather have a guy who runs great routes with great hands than a dude who can just run faster than everyone. And Justin nailed it. I mean, that's exactly how I feel. Corey D says, you think coaches at other football powers are taking notice of what Notre Dame is doing from a recruiting standpoint? Notre Dame is ascending to elite status, and that's to worry other. I know this for a fact. I've actually had conversations about this. There were coaches that were like, especially in recent years where Brian Kelly wasn't putting together the best staffs and wasn't recruiting. They're like, we don't want Brian Kelly to leave because we know that the way he's doing it, they're never going to reach their full potential. There's a lot of coaches that are nervous about Notre Dame. That's why, and I've said this before, I've said this for years. I've seen scenarios where like a kid is being recruited by like I'll just use this as an example, like Notre Dame, Florida, and Florida State. And what you'll find is Florida and Florida State both start negatively recruiting against Notre Dame, not against each other. They're rivals, but they'll negatively recruit Notre Dame because they would rather see the kid go to their rival down there than have a kid from Florida go up to Notre Dame and have success. Because once that floodgates gets opened, once Notre Dame starts getting highly ranked kids, and that's where Kyle Hamilton's going to be a big deal. You get those kids from Florida and Atlanta and Texas and California, these highly ranked kids, and they go to Notre Dame and they get their degrees and they're high draft picks and they're all Americans and Notre Dame's winning, competing for titles and winning championships. All of a sudden the floodgates are going to open. I mean, it just will. There's a lot of kids that would look harder at Notre Dame if Notre Dame was doing those things. It's just a fact. It's always been that case. And so the last thing they want is a bunch of Marcus Freemans on their staff and Mike Mickens on their staff. That's the last thing that they want because they know that if that happens in Notre Dame, because they've seen it before. They've seen in the past when Notre Dame's had good seasons, like all of a sudden they start beating them for kids that they're not used to beating them. Notre Dame beating them for. And so that's a big part. That's why there was a lot of coaches in the Midwest that were extremely happy when Harry Hiestand went back to the NFL because they're like, no, they're not going to be able to hire someone who's going to be able to do from a recruiting standpoint what Harry did. Going to Ohio and beating Urban Meyer for kids that he was personally. Urban Meyer was personally recruiting Liam Eichenberg and Tommy Kramer. That's how bad Ohio State wanted them, and he beat them for both of them. All right, let's see here. Nolan Esparza. This show has become part of my daily routine. I appreciate the honest insight and respect shown to everybody you talk about and interact with. It's a good time to be a fan of the Irish, and I agree. This has been the most fun period of time to be a Notre Dame fan, especially the last few months because of the recruiting aspect that we've seen in a very, very long time. Very long time. Patrick Bird says, Florida State is always a scary team with their athleticism. Growing up in the Florida Panhandle, do love it when Indy can win. And I think they will win. I just don't think Florida State has the talent that they've had in the past. I think they're going to get there. I think Mike Norvell is going to get them there. But this is just not a Florida State team that has the typical across-the-board athleticism that they've had in the past. Justin Knox, have you predicted a win total? I missed it. I have not yet. We'll do something like that as we get closer to the season. All I've ever said, Justin, is I think 10 is the floor. If they're not at least a 10-3 team this year, and when I mean 10, I mean 10 in the regular season. They need to be a 10-2 team. That's the floor. Now, there's a scenario in which 10-2 is a little disappointing, and there's a scenario in which 10-2 could be a pretty good season. A lot of that's going to just be determined by the opponents. But to me, that's the floor. I haven't done an actual prediction yet. A buddy of mine texted me earlier today and said that Phil Steele predicts Notre Dame to go 12-0. I haven't seen that yet. I haven't got my Phil Steele yet. But, that's possible. I think 11-1 is certainly possible. I think 10, but I said 10-2 is the floor, which means it's 10-2 or better. There's no 9-3 this year that would be acceptable. No 9-3 would be acceptable. Nolan Esparza says, if you're the head coach of Notre Dame starting in 2022, what is the first change you make in the program? Also, what is the one thing you make sure to keep the same? I think the one thing I'd want to keep the same as much as possible is the defensive staff and the strength conditioning staff. I think those things are very, 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 very important. And there's other things like the academic situation is top-notch, just the work that Adam Sargent and his crew put in. I think Amber Selking I've heard so many good things about what she does from the mental health side of things. The first thing that I would change is I would completely overhaul the nutrition aspect of things and the meal aspect of things. Notre Dame has come a long way, but from everyone that I've talked to, that especially people that have friends that are at other Power 5 programs, Notre Dame is still a ways behind when it comes to the different nutrition aspects of it for college players, and not just vitamins and stuff like that, but more just the overall meal nutrition, making sure that you're trying as much as you can to control what are going in these kids' bodies. That would be the first thing that I would overhaul. And I feel as strongly about that as I felt about how they needed to overhaul the strength program after 2015, before 2016. And we saw how that goes. I think that's something that's holding back. Now, Matt Bayless being here is somewhat keeping that from being a problem. It's not a problem, but I think if they make that change, it could take them to the next level. And I've been told they're making some improvements there, which is good. But from as of 7-8 months ago, last time I had this conversation with someone officially about it, it was good. It wasn't good. It wasn't as good as it needs to be. It was way better than it was when 5 years ago, but it's not where it needs to be. And hopefully that's one of the things, because they just hired somebody new to take for the nutrition thing. And I was told that part of it was that they're still looking to make some changes there, which would be a very, very positive thing. Skyshark 415 says a healthy skepticism, apply that to all facets of life. Absolutely. Absolutely. As my dad used to tell me, and he got it from his favorite politician growing up, but trust but verify. Patrick McCrane says, I would like to see Audric at number 6 and Kyron switch to number 40 and have them in the backfield together. Great memories. Yeah, I agree with that. A little Reggie Jerome action there. Patrick also said, Patrick Bird says, Patrick, vision of the Sugar Bowl dancing in my head. Absolutely. Jonathan O'Kimma says, I know you don't watch a lot of NFL, but do you know why Harry didn't work out with the Bears? From what I'm told, I don't think him and Matt Nagy got along real well, and Matt Nagy was making a lot of early head coach mistakes that it sounds like he's kind of gotten over. But Harry doesn't suffer fools really well. And I think Harry took a lot of flack for things that maybe were the head coach's fault, but the head coach isn't going to respond, isn't going to fire himself. So, and I also think the offensive coordinator situation was a mess. That's just some of the things I've heard, but like you said, I don't watch a whole lot of NFL myself. Jonathan says, if Patterson takes a step forward in his development this year, what's the highest you see him being drafted? I think it could be a late first, early second round pick. I've seen a mock draft that had him in the first round. Tomorrow at Irish Breakdown, Ryan Roberts, who is our residential now NFL draft expert, who I think does great analysis work, he's going to actually have his analysis of Jarrett Patterson. And let me pull up his thing real quick that he sent me, and I want to see what his draft prediction is right now. Alrighty. Okay. So that's a different player. Yep. He sent me somebody from Miami. That's not Jarrett Patterson, because it's like 5th round. That doesn't right. He has him as a second round player, 33 to 45. So he has him in the top half of the second round. And that's just based off what he's seen. To your point, if he takes a step forward, I think that jumps him into late first, early second. No question. Because he's athletic. He's got some strength. He's experienced. Great leadership. I mean, he's got maybe add 10, 15 pounds to him, and maybe a couple inches of arm length would be the only thing I think a team would say, hey, I'd like to add that to him. But he's got a lot of the tools you want, character-wise, leadership-wise, strength-wise, athleticism-wise, and now experience. So I think that's part of it. Benjamin Weiss says, you've said in the past that you think based on Notre Dame's receiver recruiting board, you're concerned they're going to go back to the philosophy of old after this year. Is there a reason you can't just ask them that? Well, number one, we get very little access to them now. And number two, I mean, I can basically write what Brian Kelly's answer is going to be. Yeah, it's going to be, well, hey, look, you have a problem. Look what we did last year, a playoff team with that, and look, Chase Claypool and Michael Floyd and all this other kind of stuff. It's very hard to get Brian Kelly to talk about aspects of the program that you're trying to ask him about from a critical standpoint, because he goes automatically into defensive mode, won't engage you in it, even if you're trying to ask a fair question. And that's just how he is. He doesn't view us as right or wrong. I mean, he doesn't view us as people whose opinions are worth necessarily engaging in. He'll just answer questions. And that's why he gets really ticked off whenever someone asks him the question that can come across as challenging. I've just kind of given up on it because I already know he's not going to answer it the way that I wanted to answer it. He's not going to engage me in a legitimate conversation where I'm bringing up a criticism and he's, take a step forward, maybe come back and ask me, well, why do you think we should go this way? And I can give my opinion or whatever, or follow up on the question, not in my opinion, but follow up on the question. Well, hey, we're seeing these 3 schools are having success with this type of player. Why does it seem that you're resistant to that? And he may have a good reason for it. But he just, right now he's just going to get defensive and talk about what they've done. And, geez, we're 33-5 or whatever out of the thing. He just refuses to engage in those conversations, even when they're very fair questions. So, I mean, it's not worth the time, to be completely honest with you, because he'll just say, we've been in the playoff 2 of the last 3 years. Why should we change? I mean, that's basically what it comes down to. Even if he doesn't believe that himself, that's what he's going to say publicly. All righty. Justin Thompson, when will the Shamrock series jerseys be released? I don't know. Usually it's like right before fall camp is usually when they start, or like early in fall camp is usually when they do it. Let's see here. Get some last couple questions here. Audrey says, Brian, does IB have a discourse page? So no, we don't. We're supposed to be having a conversation. I actually thought it was going to be today. It's going to be next Tuesday is our next publishers meeting. There's supposedly a message board situation that they're going to present to us. If that is not to my liking, I have already done some research on discourse, and I planned on that would be my next step. And then just kind of creating a discourse page and then a Patreon page where if you want to be part of the discourse thing, you sign up for either SI that way, or you go through the Patreon page, or you sign up for SI, and then I'll give you a password to the discourse page. I hope I don't have to go that route because it's kind of a pain in the butt, to be honest with you. But if the message board fix that they're going to offer us next week is up to par, then we hope to get that rolling quickly. If it's not, then I'm going to have to go for other options because we can't go into the season without having a message board. We just can't have it. It's got to get done. So I'm trying to be patient. Righty. Audrey says, how do you actually feel about everyone mocking a true freshman at left tackle? I'm fine with it because he's a different player. He's a special player. I think he'll be fine. He'll have some rookie mistakes, but he'll be okay. He's a special player. Gabe Weiss asks, this is a good question. What's the bigger advantage since he knows how Freeman coaches or how Freeman knows Cincy's personnel? I think it's the advantage to Notre Dame because Freeman's going to know the personnel, but he's also going to know their offensive system pretty well. They didn't change offensive coaches. He's going to know what they do. He's going to know the strengths and weaknesses of those players. What Cincinnati's not going to necessarily have as good of an idea on is how is Marcus Freeman going to particularly utilize the Notre Dame specific skill. I think it's something he may not know. They may not know as much about. So I think that just, again, not talking talent, like Notre Dame clearly has the better roster. Just take that aside. Just talking about it from knowledge of your opponent. I think the advantage falls to Marcus Freeman. And we kind of saw this a little bit in 2017 with Mike Elko and Wake Forest. Wake put up a lot of points in the second half, but for the first half, Notre Dame did a pretty good job of shutting Wake Forest down. They didn't do as good of a job in the second half, but first half they did. And so I think that kind of helped Mike Elko a little bit. D-Rock, as we're winding down, we have last couple questions. Hit the like, subscribe, and notifications bell. I appreciate that very, very much. Before you leave, just hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. It takes you 5 seconds to do, and then hit the notification bell so we'll always let you know when we have shows up. Because I try as best I can to try to get a couple hours notice when I can that we're going to have a show. So I'll put it out, and it'll send you a thing. You'll get a notification on the top of your YouTube page that says, hey, so-and-so is going to start a show at 1 p.m. Hit a reminder, and then you can hit the reminder on it. Doug, over 3 hours. Wow, you're an Iron Man. Well, this Iron Man is wearing down very, very, very much. So last comment, Roderick, hey, great work. Hate I missed the start. The good news is, Roderick, you're the last comment. We're going to wrap it up here with our show. We'll be back tomorrow. Vince will not be with us tomorrow. I'm going to be with Sean Davis tomorrow. We're not quite sure what topic we're going to discuss yet. Sean and I are going to figure that out tonight, but it'll certainly be Notre Dame related. We got a couple ideas that we're going to work through. So we'll be back tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern. Sean and I will be there. It'll be a lot of fun. Make sure you're checking out irishbreakdown.com for all the latest. Obviously, subscribe, notification bell. If you're listening via our podcast channel, please leave us a 5-star review. And make sure you're checking out the website. I know this channel is a lot of fun, but there's a lot of stuff that gets asked that, I kind of wrote about where if you've read the article, then we could kind of take a next level. Like, okay, you wrote this, so I don't have to just answer the basic question. It's you wrote this, let's dive into some more detail. I think that would make for even more fun. And so that's good. And then Audrey says, Irish Breakdown is the only page I get notifications from. So go Irish, keep up the hard work, Coach. I appreciate that very much, Audrey. So this has been a lot of fun. Jonathan says, thanks for the great show. This was actually a good show because we had some back and forth and not always on the same page. And that makes it a lot more fun. So anyway, Roderick, when we stop it here, you'll be able to start over, buddy. And I hope you enjoy the beginning of the show as much as you enjoyed from when you picked up. So everybody have a great rest of your day. Be safe. Spend time with your family. Love on your family. And we will see all of you again tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern. So have a great rest of your day. And make sure you check out irishbreakdown.com. We'll talk to you again very, very soon.